There's a killer in the ocean. It is the wolf of the seas. It hunts in packs, feasting on seals and whales. The killer whale. One of its favorite hunting grounds is the entire west coast of North America. These hunters have no enemies, but it now appears that they are at risk of becoming extinct before the end of the 21st century. The clue to their fate is new. The appearance of friendly orphans, and it's an ominous sign that this is a killer in peril. A city is no place for a killer whale. But in January of 2002, 5 kilometers from Seattle, Washington, a young orca is sighted in Puget Sound. It seems to be about 2 years old, only a baby. The orca, or killer whales as they're commonly known, virtually never travel alone. This 570-kilogram baby is in a dangerous place, swimming in heavy boat and ferry traffic. Ken Balcom, a well-known whale biologist in the Seattle area, is one of the first on the scene to investigate.
This is a whale that had the great potential for just bonding to a human. If you were there, she'd come to you. You could slap the water, she'd slap her flipper. You could say roll over, she'd roll over.
But no one knows where this killer whale came from, or why she is alone. Balcom has been keeping track of the orcas in these waters for 27 years. He knows every orca that lives here, but this one is a mystery. Somehow, she's become separated from the rest of her family. First, Balcom needs to know where this lost young whale comes from. She could be from one of 3 very different populations of killer whales. One type are known as transients. These are the ocean's fiercest hunters, eating only marine mammals, including some species of whales. Transient killer whales travel up and down the Pacific coast of the United States and Canada. And there is one more possibility. These killer whales are called residents. They too travel up and down the coast, but return to the same feeding grounds every year. Through information gathered in Puget Sound, the baby is identified as Springer, a Canadian killer whale. Soon after, its identity is confirmed by Canada's leading killer whale experts. John Ford and Graham Ellis have been tracking and identifying orcas for over 30 years. Each year they head out into the Johnstone Strait to study killer whales.
This area right here in Johnstone Strait is probably the best easily accessible known location for viewing killer whales and studying them in the world. And as a result, most of what we know about killer whales scientifically has been learned with this population here and the sort of sister community, the southern residents off southern Vancouver Island.
Since 1973, these researchers have been taking mugshots of killer whales using dorsal fins to identify them. Dorsal fins are like fingerprints. Each fin has nicks and scrapes that are unique to each animal. Ellis and Ford's long-term killer whale study is probably the most detailed of its kind in the world. Ironically, killer whales aren't whales at all. They're dolphins, the largest of their kind. But they are deadly. They'll hunt fish, marine mammals, and even attack a bear or moose if it decides to swim too far from shore.
Just trying to see what groups are here. They're really spread out.
Who's that over there, Graham?
I think that's I-24 with their new calf and I-49, I believe.
This is A-54 with her very first calf. And her mother, A-30's grandmother's here as well. So we got 3 generations right here.
Killer whales travel in groups as large as 20 members. Ford and Ellis have discovered that each of these pods is actually an extended family.
Really, it took a number of years before it was clear that what we were dealing with here was a very unusual social system, strongly matrilineal in that every whale in the pod is actually descended from females in the group. So those big males are not the fathers of the offspring in the group. They're actually the grown-up sons of the mothers and the grandmothers in the group. They never leave the group. And this is what's so unusual about resident killer whales. It's a closed social system. The only way into one of these pods is to be born into it, and the only way out really is to die. I-33.
Yeah, she's surrounded.
Ford and Ellis know their killers well, and their expertise helped identify the mysterious orphan in Seattle.
It took some time to sleuth out exactly who it was, but it turned out it was a young 2-year-old whale from a pod that we know very well, and her sort of popular name is Springer. And so this young whale seemed to have become orphaned. We think her mother died, and in that process she became separated from the rest of the matriline, the rest of the pod, and wandered around until she ended up in Seattle Harbor.
The news spreads fast, and Springer becomes an instant celebrity, making headlines and the 6 o'clock news. Everyone, it seems, wants to know about this abandoned baby.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Experts at the Vancouver Aquarium are called in to help. The American government asks for advice from veterinarian Dr. David Huff, who also has extensive experience with killer whales.
About every 3 weeks or so, we would go down and go out in one of their boats and just kind of hang out with her.
Dr. Huff suspects that Springer is sick. The clue is her breath. It has an acetone odor called ketosis.
When you got anywhere near the blow from her exhalation and sniffed it, it was like opening a can of paint thinner.
Springer's bad breath might be caused by consuming her own body fat to survive, a sign that she could be starving.
With that as background,
in Seattle, the environmental groups Orca Conservancy and the Earth Island Institute find the money to finance a rescue mission.
We're dealing with a wild animal. She's never been restrained before. She will resist. That's her natural reaction.
Springer is about to make history for her species and our own. By May, about 4 months after being discovered swimming alone in Puget Sound, it's clear that Springer, the orphan killer whale, needs to be rescued. The problem is how. Jeff Foster, the world's leading expert on capturing killer whales in the wild, is called in to help. Foster brings his team to Seattle to plan their strategy.
When you're dealing with live animals, and you never know how they're going to respond, and so it's important to have contingency plans.
Foster's first idea is to lure Springer into a canvas sling. It's tricky, like convincing a whale to put on a raincoat, but it's the easiest way to get her into a boat. Plan B is a giant underwater pen that can hold Springer if she refuses to swim into the sling. The challenge here is convincing her to swim inside.
This will hang down. It's 30 feet deep. We have a lead line on the bottom that weighs approximately 100 pounds. Now, it's light enough that she can lift that lead line up if she does get into one of the corners, so she can still take her breaths and everything. But when you put this much net in the water, there is that concern of it catching the currents like a sail and the stuff bagging. So the way they designed the net and hung the net, it should hang fairly straight in the water if we're at slack tides.
It will take a small army of scientists and support boats to capture Springer, plus a lot of money. But why does this killer whale deserve the royal treatment? Part of the answer is that killer whales have become a Hollywood icon, and in the Pacific Northwest especially, they're public animal number one.
Once considered vermin on this coast, these animals are now icons of the Wild West Coast, and people come from around the world to see them. They live in societies that are complex, and we can actually relate to them as being highly social mammals ourselves. where their young animals are tended by the adults in the group, and they have these very cohesive societies.
To the public, Springer is a baby in trouble. To scientists, she's the future of a species in trouble.
Starting in the mid-90s, things started to change. The southern residents first peaked and then started on a declining trend. More recently, the northern residents seem to have gone on a similar declining trend. And so this has kind of triggered a few alarm bells. Why are their numbers going down?
The killer whales living near Seattle are in trouble. 20% have died in the last 10 years, leaving a mere 84 orca. The northern residents off Vancouver Island have 200 members, but their population too is declining. Orca breed slowly, and today's losses could signify the beginning of the end. Ken Balcom has been watching the southern residents closely, and he doesn't like what he sees. Using photo identification, he has constructed a family tree of the southern residents.
We put up all the living whales, their photographs are here. And all these other spots are little tombstones of whales that were alive during the study but have died. This is one little mature line that's totally dead. There's another mature line up here that only has the grandma surviving. All the youngsters are dead. So what this story is saying is that there's a very high mortality of young and middle-aged animals that should not be occurring. We have the older animals that are still here. Something happened that has reduced their fertility and their immune response. They're just dying.
Balcom's data shows clearly that young orca like Springer are dying far too often, and being alone doesn't help.
We realized Springer's long-term survival chances were very, very poor, and that likely we would need to intervene and get her out of that area back to Johnson Strait up in this area, where she might have a chance of reintegrating with her pod or related pod.
In British Columbia, Springer would find more food, cleaner water, and a chance to reunite with her family. But to get there now, she'll have to be captured, treated, and released. To do that, Jeff Foster needs to earn her trust. He makes many trips out to visit Springer. It's like a courtship. Foster wants her to get to know the team, as well as the ropes he'll be using. The team gives Springer back rubs and hang the stretcher in the water, hoping she'll get used to it. But time is running out.
She was going in smaller and smaller area around the ferries, and we all felt it was just a matter of time before she got run over and either killed or badly injured.
Game plan is just trying to get everybody out as close as we can, then we'll go over and interact with her, and then start moving everything into position if we can.
Now, 6 months after Springer was discovered, Foster and his team are told to capture the orphan killer whale. They try a test run first to see if she's ready.
It's a great day. We've been really lucky with the weather pattern this time of year. Usually in Seattle in June, you can never depend on it at all. Conditions are right. Really the only thing that's working against us right now is our tidal action. We have some of the lowest tides of the year, so that's going to work a little bit against us.
Foster decides to use Plan B and attempt to lure the baby killer whale into the net enclosure. It appears that the team's courtship has worked. Springer happily swims up to the underwater cage, but the baby orca is playing hard to get. She takes a quick look around and then changes her mind.
Yeah, I'm very happy that 2 different occasions she swam in and actually into the enclosure itself. It would have been pretty easy to put a tail line on her, but that's okay. I think there was so much activity around. She did cooperate. She did go inside the enclosure, and then she lost interest and left.
It's a good start, but to save Springer's life, the rescue team will need to try again. And the sooner, the better. Springer has now been swimming alone in Washington's Puget Sound for at least 6 months. And the scientists here are keen to take her home to Canada. But why the rush? Puget Sound is already home to 84 killer whales. They eat the same food as Springer. Why not let them adopt this orphaned orca? The problem is that local killer whales will have nothing to do with Springer. And the reason? She has a foreign accent. No one understands killer whale communication better than John Ford. For 15 years, he's been studying their sophisticated, mysterious language. Ford is able to eavesdrop on the whales by dropping a special waterproof microphone into the ocean.
Goes down to perhaps 10 meters. Perhaps make a little recording here. Very distinctive dialect sounds of I-31 pod. And the animals are kind of scattered foraging. We're ahead of them, so we're detecting their high-pitched echolocation clicks. These sounds here, sort of popping sounds, they're clicks that they're using to navigate to find food.
Killer whales live in waters where visibility is often less than 7 meters. And so they use sound the way a bat does, as a kind of radar. They bounce their clicks off fish and rocks, listening to the echo to judge distance.
They also use a very complex set of very distinctive loud calls that are between 1 and 2 seconds long within the group and between groups to keep in touch. It seems each individual born to a group learns the repertoire of calls that is actually a sort of a vocal tradition in that lineage that allows it, it seems, to be part of that group.
This is where Springer learned her calls, from her own family called the A-pod. And she's still using their distinct dialect. It should help her family recognize Springer if she can be returned north to these waters.
These dialects are very stable. Probably they outlive the actual individuals in the group, so I suspect that some of these major dialects have been around probably for decades, if not centuries, and are just simply passed on from generation to generation. Those kind of calls are very typical of their repertoire, their dialect.
Like humans, killer whales aren't born with their calls and have to learn them from their families. Killer whales can learn up to 12 distinct sounds unique to their pod. Springer had mastered them before she lost her mother and wandered into Puget Sound. But Springer's dialect is causing problems here in Washington. Local whales can tell she's a stranger just by the way she sounds. Her timing is terrible. This 2-year-old needs her family to teach her how to hunt for fish. Ironically, if she was much older, her dialect might attract a mate. Lance Barrett Leonard is a population geneticist at the Vancouver Aquarium. He has used John Ford's acoustic research to understand how dialects affect a killer whale's love life.
Neither males nor females leave their mothers, and so of course the obvious question is, are they inbred, and if not, how do they avoid inbreeding? This led me into a fairly extensive set of paternity tests.
DNA was collected from killer whales. The genes of the young were compared to genes of older males in the pods, and the results were striking. None of the older males were fathers of the calves. This proved that fathers are outsiders who don't live with the mothers or their children.
So although they spend their entire lives living in their natal pod, they don't breed within it. The fathers were always outside the pod. Resident killer whales are organized not only into pods but into clans, or acoustic clans, or language groups, dialect groups. And the fathers of calves are usually outside the dialect group or the clan.
Killer whales, it seems, use the equivalent of one-night stands to avoid incest, and fathers are always strangers, who sound very different from the pod. Females even choose elderly males so that their daughters can't mate with their fathers by mistake. For killer whales, this is the language of love. But for Springer, it may be years before her dialect attracts a mate, and right now, she needs human help simply to get home. In Seattle, Jeff Foster's team gets ready for a second rescue attempt. Once again, the team sets out to capture Springer, but this time, they'll use their hands. The ocean currents are too strong to use the net enclosure today.
There's always a potential danger jumping into the water with a large animal. These animals are very powerful. You don't know how they're going to respond when they're in that kind of situation.
If the plan works, it will be the first time a wild orca has ever been captured in order to be returned to the wild. Foster has been earning Springer's trust for weeks. Now it's time to put it to the test. The first step is to slip a noose around Springer's tail.
It was nerve-wracking. He had incredible patience and just waited for exactly the right time. I'm thinking, this isn't going to work today, this isn't going to work. And then all of a sudden, Jeff just slipped the noose over the tail, pulled on it, and it was amazing.
Once we had the tail line on her and we were able to cinch it up, then we knew that we had her under somewhat control. And then at that point, it's important to get in there and raise her head and get a hold of her pectoral fins and hang onto the dorsal, because they have a tendency to spin when they're in the tail loop, and get her up and make sure she has good solid breaths.
All she did was do a few little sort of tentative duck dive things with her head and slap her tail around a couple times.
More bodies, more people in the water.
Once we had the control of the head, we brought other divers into the water to be able to manipulate her back into the stretcher.
This is the dangerous part. A thrashing 500-kilogram killer whale can easily break a diver's bones. Foster's team has come to expect it, but Springer puts up very little resistance.
Bradley called landing craft in. Yeah, they're on their way.
Surrounded on all sides, she allows the team to slip her into a stretcher. It's the beginning of the strangest ride of her young life.
A little bit, just a place. Let's clear the belly strap. Yeah.
She is hoisted onto a barge that will be her home for the next hour. The first stage of Springer's journey home to her family in Canada is complete. But no one knows if they will accept her, or if she will be healthy enough to make the trip. After spending months all alone, 2-year-old Springer is now surrounded by doting adults. The orphan killer whale doesn't appear upset, and her human friends are thrilled.
Yeah, she was going like this, and I just didn't want to bump her with the...
Springer is on her way home, but she won't be going to Canada right away. First, she needs to be admitted to a unique animal hospital. Her speckled skin and low weight prove that she's sick and in need of treatment quickly.
This we're going to use to test all of her general health parameters, try to understand, one, how she's doing, and if she has any major medical problems, what we can do about it. So this is
Springer's care is now in the hands of veterinarians from the United States and Canada.
We wanted to give her a clean bill of health and a health certificate. It was very important to check her to make sure that she wasn't going to bring any diseases back from Puget Sound to the whales in northern Vancouver Island and put her pod or other pods up north at risk.
It's extremely important to get a blood sample. We had to find out if she had any inborn errors of metabolism. Was there something inherent in her that would not make her one that we would want to return to her pod?
For the rescue team, Springer is a rare opportunity. For most of them, they're used to studying killer whales hands-on in aquariums or washed up dead on a beach. This is a chance to both study and cure a living wild killer whale. And Springer's been living in a dangerous place. Industrial chemicals have been pouring into the ocean here for decades. The situation has become so drastic that wildlife toxicologist Peter Ross was asked to investigate, and his findings are shocking.
The Pacific killer whales frequenting the waters off Vancouver, Victoria, Seattle are now considered the most contaminated marine mammals anywhere in the world. And when I say contaminated, I'm talking about PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. We tend to be concerned about these chemicals because they're very toxic. They tend to be very persistent. They're fat soluble, they bioaccumulate in food chains. They just don't disappear.
PCBs were banned in Canada and the United States over 20 years ago. But just as Peter Ross found, they didn't go away. They drift through the air and in the oceans and are still manufactured in Russia. PCBs collect in ocean sediment and are then gobbled up by fish. The salmon stocks of the Pacific coast are one of the primary food sources for resident killer whales like Springer, and they too contain PCBs and many other contaminants.
The whales are getting a double whammy here. They're at the top of the food chain, eating concentrated amounts of toxic prey, and they live a long time, and they're unable to offload it.
Males seem to have it worst. They spend their entire lives collecting and storing PCBs in their fat tissues. Females, however, can actually lose PCBs. The chemicals leave their bodies through the fat in breast milk and are passed on to their young. Springer was probably born with PCBs, and the fish she has been eating contain them too. Her low weight suggests that her body has survived by consuming body fat, a perfect way to release PCBs into the bloodstream.
We know that PCBs cause cancer. We know that PCBs affect the immune system. This means they're more vulnerable to disease. They may be more vulnerable to getting a cold or a little infection, or that cold might develop into a much more serious infection that they can't recover from.
No one knows why Springer's mother died, but she was part of a generation that came of age when PCBs were still being produced legally, and her death may have been caused by side effects of the chemical. PCBs are now one of the prime suspects in the deaths of American killer whales. With no natural enemies, most killer whales should die of old age. But the southern resident population here is down to just 84 members, and it seems to be both the young and the PCB generation that are dying the most. Springer's doctors aren't exactly sure why she's sick. It could be PCBs, even a genetic anomaly. They decide to run a series of tests, hoping that they can cure her and then send her home. For now, this holding pen is both home and hospital, although no one here is sure that she'll be a willing patient and remain inside.
Two riskiest aspects of the whole capture were when you first go in the water with her and try to control her head during the capture itself, and then also when we put her into an environment with walls, the net pen. We don't know how she's going to respond. If she wanted to and swam hard enough and fast enough, she could punch right through the net. And she's from a three-dimensional world where she doesn't have really any barriers, and they don't know what to do when they come to a corner. A lot of times they can get their nose down into a net, or if the net isn't hung properly, they can get entangled in it very easily.
Springer has a good chance of recovering and ultimately returning to Canada to connect with her pod. But first, Springer's rescuers will have to practice a little whale medicine on a very sick child of the sea. Springer, the orphan killer whale, is now safe in a holding pen just outside of Seattle, Washington. Before she can return home to Canada, she needs a clean bill of health and a lot of help to get there. Dr. Peter Schrader is an American veterinarian, and it's his job to help Springer get better. The first challenge is her skin condition. Killer whales spend a lot of time rubbing against each other. It does feel good, but it's more than just a show of affection.
Her skin looked terrible. I've never seen skin like that on a cetacean. These animals are tremendously tactile. They're always rubbing against one another because under those layers of cells, marine algae can grow, fungus can grow, and these cells have to be sloughed off, which makes the skin healthy. Rubbing against another animal helps that process.
Springer has been alone for at least 6 months without any relatives to rub against. It's left her lonely and itchy. Dr. Schrader realizes that she needs something to rub against, and as often as possible. Fortunately, Springer provides her own inspiration. The team retrieves a stick she's been playing with in Puget Sound. A log is soon added. These whale toys work wonders.
Within probably an hour, she was doing barrel rolls and circles and basically quivering all over with joy. She could get a little push against this, which started to help her skin right away and help her psyche. I mean, she felt good doing that. I think it was obvious.
But Springer needs more than a log to make her feel better. She's underweight by at least 100 kilograms and needs to get her appetite back quickly. Dr. Schrader and his team want to help, but they know they can't get too close. If Springer gets used to human company, she may find it hard to return to the wild. The team decides to stay out of sight and use cameras to spy on their patient.
It's a remote monitoring system, so we can minimize our presence out around the pool side. And this is just a real handy way with a remote operated camera that can go anywhere on the pool, and we can monitor everything she's doing.
Springer gets fed using another kind of remote system. A 10-meter-long tube is designed to deliver live fish to the pen. A healthy killer whale will eat between 50 and 150 kilograms of fish a day. Springer is eating only 1 or 2 fish. Somehow, she's lost her appetite. Schrader first suspects that Springer's exposure to PCBs has compromised her immune system. But stool samples show exactly what is making her sick.
She had worms, and we know that worms will keep the immune status triggered. If the immune system is triggered long enough and often enough, it'll basically wear out over time.
Dr. Huff remains on site as the Canadian veterinarian. He and Dr. Schrader decide on a plan to get rid of Springer's worms.
Dr. Pete Schrader and I passed a stomach tube and put about 6 liters of water into her. And then we followed it up with a chaser of deworming medicine.
This worm medicine, which is the same kind of worm medicine that people use for cows and horses. It's not a special worm medicine for whales. 2 hours after that treatment, she started eating as if she finally realized that I have an appetite.
It was absolutely amazing. She ate so well that our concern then was not to overfeed her. So it was a remarkable turnaround.
It's in her mouth. Now it's gone.
After that, we could no longer smell the ketosis on her breath. The skin just started looking much, much better. And from that point on, we never again saw live worms in her stool.
For the first time in months, Springer appears happy and healthy. She's getting the strength she needs to return to the wild, and her recovery is just in time. Every July, her family returns to southern British Columbia to hunt salmon. Springer needs to find them within the next month. No one knows where killer whales go in the winter, so it's now or never.
We decided it would be prudent to give her some antibiotics to prevent any disease. This was a request by the Canadian veterinarian, Dr. Huff.
Dr. Schrader has the medication injected into fish so he can be sure that Springer gets a full dose. Now the Canadian government can be confident that Springer won't be importing any diseases into her family's pod. After 1 month in Whale Hospital, Springer is finally ready to go home. Jeff Foster and his team return to load Springer onto a large catamaran that will take her north. Springer has gained weight, over 70 kilograms, and needs a crane to help her get on board. For some, it is a bittersweet moment. Dr. Schrader has spent a month with Springer, sleeping in a trailer next to her pen each night.
She wants to go home, and we're about to take her there. So it's with great joy, but a bit of not reluctance, but I guess poignancy that we get her to go back with her wild today. Kind of like turning loose one of your kids to college, I guess.
It is a 12-hour trip from Puget Sound to Vancouver Island. During the journey, Springer needs to be kept wet. She also needs to be acclimatized to her new environment.
All the way along, we were pumping in seawater and pumping out seawater so that by the time she got to Johnstone Strait, it wasn't as if she was changing from Puget Sound water to Johnstone Strait water. But there was no sudden change in temperature, no sudden change in composition. There were no variables for her.
Springer's boat reaches the Canadian border and a country that is delighted to have her back.
Fisheries and Oceans Canada really would like to thank you and acknowledge the tremendous work that National Marine Fisheries Service has done, Jeff Foster and his team, and all the other organizations and individuals taking care of A73 and preparing her to come home on this journey. Canada has just an excellent team ready to take over and begin the next phase of this, which is bringing her home.
She's being ferried to the Johnstone Strait, home to 200 resident killer whales, including her own family. The orphan gets a hero's welcome from the local Aboriginal peoples. Where European culture has often feared and loathed killer whales, First Nations of the Pacific Northwest revere the killer whale as one of the guardians of the oceans. But Springer won't be rejoining her family right away. Jeff Foster and his team lower her into another holding pen. She needs to rest after her confusing high-speed journey north. Now there's only one challenge left: to reunite Springer with her family. No one is sure if this long-lost orphan will be accepted back into the pod. And the answer will surprise everyone. After being lost and alone for months, Springer the orphan killer whale is finally back in Canada. Her arrival home attracts a flood of attention from both the public and the media.
The whole Springer event was something that none of us had ever been through before. There was incredible interest in the whole operation, something that we've never seen, of course. And everybody was saying, okay, when are you going to let her go? You know, she's here now. And we had a number of criteria that had to be met, of course, in order to release her from the net pen.
Fortunately, the timing is good for a family reunion. Springer's family, the A-Pod, have returned to the Johnstone Strait for the annual salmon runs. John Ford and Graham Ellis have discovered that Springer's birth family has shrunk to only 3 members, including a grandmother and a great-aunt. This small group may not want Springer back after the death of her mother.
We didn't know whether this would work or not. It had never been attempted. This was really an experiment to see if this whale that had been out of its pod and any other kind of pod for at least 6 months, probably longer, would be accepted back into the group or would want to go back to the group.
The Canadian team decides to keep Springer in the pen for several weeks, giving her time to recover from her long boat trip north. It may also take time for any of her extended family to swim by.
Turned out she was vigorous. She was not fazed at all by the transport.
But what happens next surprises everyone.
That first night, whales came swimming by and there was clear acoustic exchanges between Springer and the whales.
She went wild. She got very excited and that pen started to breach. And she was sort of screaming, calling out as loudly as she could and blowing our headphones off as we listened to her on the hydrophone.
She was very excited, pushing at the net. She wanted out.
The very next morning, Springer's pod arrives and seems to be waiting for the prodigal whale.
It was more than we could have possibly hoped for. It was amazing. We all looked at ourselves and said, is this really happening? Is it really this good?
The team knows they have to make a decision.
They're split into two groups.
I want a one-word answer. Is it a go on their part? If it is,
Flynn wants a one-word answer, yes or no. It was nerve-wracking for me because all the capture team is in there holding her back, and the researchers are out a mile or two in the bay, and I'm trying to relay the message to them. But there really was no discussion. Everybody knew it was the best it was ever going to get.
We sort of did a quick vote over little walkie-talkies with all the various people who were involved, and I said, okay, let's do it.
Drop the net, open it up. It's being done now.
After at least 6 months away from her family, Springer takes her chance to go home.
Straight out and she's still under there. The net's open, she's out and she hasn't come up yet. It looks like she's heading straight out. She was typical Springer. She made a beeline for the whales, and when she got about 2/3 of the way there, went, oh, kelp. Let me play for a minute.
Root marks right off here. How far?
Ironically, Springer seems in no rush for a family reunion. She stops 30 meters away and keeps her distance. Then, the whales swim away from each other.
We thought, uh-oh, maybe she doesn't want to be a wild whale anymore. So the initial reaction on both parts was not very encouraging.
And the stakes are high. Springer is not the only killer whale who needs help. 500 kilometers away, on the northwestern tip of Vancouver Island, another baby killer whale has gotten lost. His name is Luna, and he hails from the toxic waters off Seattle. Luna is also rubbing up against boats and needs to find his own family.
We're not decided on what we should do about Luna down the road. We'll just have to, I think, continue assessing the success of the Springer operation to see whether it's worth trying a similar kind of thing with Luna. The southern residents really need him. They can't really spare any other animals. They're declining in numbers, and it'd be great to see him back into that population.
The Springer rescue is providing a reason for hope. 4 days after her release, she joins up with a 15-year-old female from a related pod. It seems that Springer has been adopted. The first time this behavior has ever been observed in the wild. For now, it's a good omen for lost or stranded killer whales in the future. And thanks to Springer, scientists now know that killer whales can be rescued and taken home. But the bigger problem is that home may not be a safe place for any killer whale. Noise pollution from boats can affect their navigation, and PCBs are already known to cause serious health problems.
We're going to be with this problem for a number of years. We should at least identify the root causes. We should hope that there is some potential good ending to all this.
When animals eat things that are toxic, that interfere with their hormones, that are different than what they've evolved with, it's going to have an effect on their reproductive rate. And that population is probably destined to become extinct unless there's going to be some major changes.
For the first time, scientists have rescued a stranded killer whale. They may need that skill in the years to come. The vast Pacific itself appears to be in a state of peril, and on the horizon there may be an epidemic of orphaned or stranded killer whales. Today, the ocean is not a safe place to be, especially for its mightiest and most magnificent hunter. Tugging constantly at man's spirit for adventure, the Arctic has challenged explorers for centuries. For most, the prize was the North Pole, but to get there, the journey often began here, on Ellesmere Island. This land of terrible beauty has lured many hardy souls seeking adventure, but who found only suffering or death. And it's been said that Ellesmere has the highest misery per visitor ratio in the world. One man knows the extreme allure of this island well. Jerry Kobalenko has walked more miles here than any living explorer. Defying the laws of the Arctic, he travels alone, following in the footsteps of the early explorers, learning from their mistakes and misery.
I think that the extremes are part of my attraction of travel here because I do fairly well when the going is hard. I wouldn't define a love of extremes as a drug. It's just it's a home. And I think home is not where you live, it's where you belong.
We call the world's tallest mountain the Third Pole, and challenge it simply because it's there. But to Jerry Kobalenko, there is nothing simple about Ellesmere Island, a place he calls the horizontal Everest. Think of the little metal disc that sits on top of a globe. Ellesmere Island lies just under that, its northern shore only 700 kilometers from the North Pole. An island almost the size of Great Britain, but with an average annual temperature of minus 20 degrees Celsius and less than 20 centimeters of precipitation a year. For the most part, Ellesmere is a polar desert. On first glance, life seems impossible here. But nature has made a pact with Ellesmere, a devil's bargain. An incredible diversity of species have adapted to this unforgiving world of ice and snow, but they can't leave. Their unique metabolisms thrive in the cold, but would fail any further south. In the new lexicon of the North, we call these creatures extremophiles. And Jerry Kobalenko is one of them.
I've always enjoyed the cold. The air is like chilled champagne. It's just beautiful.
Every year for the past 15 years, Jerry's left family and friends behind to spend 4 months alone on Ellesmere Island. He hauls all he needs to survive on a single sled and has traveled over 6,000 kilometers, more than any other living Arctic explorer.
Top of the world.
Like all creatures capable of making Ellesmere their home, Jerry too has evolved here and forged a unique relationship with one of the last truly wild places on Earth.
I began here as a hard traveler. I just wanted to do distance, get from A to B as hard as possible, push physical limits. And then I became interested in wildlife and photography and lately history on the island. So in a way, I've become a hard traveling student of the island.
Oh, that hurts.
Most explorers live for a challenge, but Jerry's annual return to Ellesmere is inspired by dark mysteries. Clues to what happens when the human mind collides with the unforgiving realities of the North.
I just happened to be wandering the island and turned up a skull, a human skull. It was the only skull I'd ever seen up to that point. But more than that, this had a cut above the ear. And it was clearly made from a sharp instrument coming down from above and from slightly behind. This guy was murdered centuries ago. So I just couldn't get out of my head the mystery behind his murder. And I think that was one of the first things that kept drawing me back to Ellesmere. The questions that some of these ghosts raise about what happened to them.
This man has become Jerry's latest obsession. Lieutenant Adolphus Greeley, leader of a doomed expedition to Ellesmere in 1881. And Jerry has returned to solve the mystery of what went wrong. In the summer of 1881, Greeley and 24 men set out to study the weather on Ellesmere Island. His team was composed of Army meteorologists, astronomers, and scientists, but no Arctic explorers. Only a few of the men could even row a boat. When their 2-year mission stretched to 3, their inexperience proved fatal. Few of the men would return alive. Greeley's expedition is now considered one of the greatest disasters in Arctic history. And for Jerry, it is a mystery that begs to be solved. Why did they die, while he survives alone, year after year?
Following the footsteps of the old explorers, particularly when there was a tragedy, helps me understand people in dire straits, and that's very revealing. Greeley captained a failed expedition where 19 died of 25. What happened to this guy?
Hugging the jagged edge of Ellesmere's east coast, Jerry travels north, following Greeley's route to the place where this mystery begins. Greeley's home for 2 years, Discovery Harbor. It is late spring on Ellesmere Island, and the ice is melting quickly. For Jerry Kobalenko, it's the best time of year to do some exploring. But then, he knows what he's doing. In 1881, Greeley's expedition headed north along the coast by boat, seeking its new home base, Discovery Harbor.
Yeah, this is the end of the road.
This bleak coastline was to become home to 25 men for 2 years. Their ship arrived on August 13, 1881. Greeley christened the site Fort Conger, named after one of his political allies back home in Washington. 18 tons of gear were unloaded, including 200 scientific instruments, 2,000 pounds of potatoes, and a plan.
Unlike most expeditions, they didn't keep their ship here. The ship went home, and they had arrangements for the ship to come back the following year to drop off some more supplies, and the year after that to pick them up.
They brought planks to build their quarters and used a wall of ice for insulation. Greeley was the Army's top weatherman. He had his men collect data on weather every hour. Soon enough, they would experience Ellesmere's climate in their bones.
The sun disappears here in late October, and it doesn't rise till the 3rd week of February. It's quite common for it to be minus 58 or 59 Celsius. It was cold enough at Fort Conger one year that when some men put whiskey outside, it froze solid. And so a few of them had the chance to eat hard liquor.
Their heat came from coal, dug out of a natural seam 7 kilometers away. It was the main reason Greeley was drawn to Discovery Harbor. Today, his stove is the largest artifact that remains.
This is Greely's stove. They ate their bacon, their bully beef, and their beans on this stove. But when the first explorers after Greely came and looked inside, they found human skulls. Greely plundered a lot of Inuit graves and put them in the stove for safekeeping before he left. In that time, anything like that was archaeological research. All the skulls are gone now, and all that's left inside is some fox droppings.
Evidence of the expedition litters the Fort Conger site. Artifacts are almost perfectly preserved in the dry Arctic air. But so far, there are no clues here to the tragedy that awaited Greely and his men.
Walking in the footsteps of the explorers helps me understand to what extent they were good travelers and to what extent they were just kind of bumbling about. One of them, Ellison, whom Greely described as one of my loyalist men, though not of the brightest, planted a vegetable garden. And he tried to encourage the seeds to grow in this cold climate by pouring boiling water over them. They didn't fare too well.
Greely knew his men would be happier with fresh meat than tinned beef, so the men searched the island for game. They discovered a strange menagerie of creatures who thrived in this barren landscape. Among them, the world's largest hare, the Arctic hare. Weighing in at 6 kilograms, it is cat-sized, but with a remarkable trick for escaping predators like the Arctic fox. Leaping upright allows them to reach speeds of up to 50 kilometers an hour, making them the fastest animal in the Arctic. Like many Arctic animals, this hare never hibernates, surviving winters by digging down to find food. Even stranger, they travel in herds, sometimes numbering in the thousands. For the Arctic hare, there's safety in numbers. But for explorers, danger's what it's all about. During the winter of 1882, Greely set aside science for dreams of glory. He ordered his men to head north to set new records in exploration. They returned frostbitten and snowblind. For Greely's generation, the Arctic was known as the Circle of Mysteries. No one knew what lay between here and the North Pole, so Greely sent his men to Greenland, where they set a new latitude record by 6 kilometers. But the Arctic's Mount Everest, the North Pole, would await this man, Commander Robert E. Peary, who claimed the pole a generation later.
When Peary came to Fort Conger, Greely had been gone for about 20 years, and he found this huge edifice that Greely had built. Peary called it this great barn of a place. He demolished it, and he built these 3 small cabins that he felt were much more efficient. He first reached Fort Conger in the middle of the winter, the polar night. He froze his toes. And here, at this very place, he had to have his doctor cut off 8 of those toes without anesthetic. He lay here in agony for months.
In Greely's day, the North Pole seemed impossibly distant. So when he decided to lead an exploration team of his own, he headed west into the uncharted interior of Ellesmere Island, a world no white man had ever seen, and a route never retraced until now. In the spring of 1882, Lieutenant Adolphus Greely led 4 men into the interior of Ellesmere Island. Now, Jerry Kobalenko retraces their path alone, searching for artifacts and answers.
Somebody said that the high Arctic is an empire where in the summer at least, the sun never sets. I love the 24 hours of daylight that lets you go as hard as you want to for as long as you want to.
Greely left the safety of Fort Conger and headed westward into completely uncharted territory. He found a glacier left over from the last ice age, 50 kilometers long and 10 wide. He named it Henrietta, after his wife. Greely wrote to her constantly. "When I get back to you, have no fear that I will ever be willing to leave you again. One such separation is enough for a lifetime." Greely's biggest discovery was a vast oasis in this polar desert. At 500 square kilometers, this is the largest lake in the high north. Greely named it Lake Hazen, for a general he knew during the American Civil War. Even with 24 hours of sunlight a day, there is ice everywhere. Up here, there's a saying that white men think of ice as frozen water, but the Inuit think of water as melted ice. It is the Arctic's great shapeshifter. Here there is only one cardinal rule: never travel alone. Jerry's solitary style is unusual and risky.
I don't have a fear of dying alone or falling through ice. It's possible for anything to happen anywhere. It's possible to be walking on a sidewalk and get clipped by a car as it jumps the curb. On my first expedition, I had a fall through the ice and it really shook me. My emergency transmitter didn't work, and it taught me that bringing gadgets like that along is very dangerous. And so since then I haven't taken any with me because I don't want to rely psychologically on anything but myself and my understanding of the land. As a walker, feet are absolutely the most important part of your body, and you have to treat them like they're gold. As long as you have your wheels, you can make tracks, but the minute the wheels fall off, you're in trouble.
Lake Hazen is a true oasis, surrounded by polar desert. The melting glacier brings new water each year. The open water attracts travelers like the snow goose, who has a one-track mind. Courtship is brief and direct here. There's no time to be coy. Families must get started quickly, before the ice returns. Greely reached these shores in June of 1882. He found the lake teeming with butterflies and waterfowl. He came with 4 men and a cart packed with telescopes, sextants, and gear. It broke down somewhere near the lake. Now, 120 years later, Jerry wants to find it.
This side of Hazen has a face that only a mother could love, really. This is a polar desert, so you're not getting a lot of swamp. You will get tussocks at the foot of slopes caused by seepage in the permafrost. They're like walking on beach balls. It might have even been the sort of thing that broke down their cart eventually. It's one of those holy grails of the island, and I'd really like to find it.
Greeley's men dragged their cart 200 kilometers before its wheels finally fell off, but no one knows where. We do know that Greeley and his men celebrated the 4th of July with rum and lime by the water's edge. Jerry can't find the cart on the shore and decides to head into the surrounding hills to continue his search. The hills are home to one of nature's greatest explorers, the long-tailed yager. It migrates up to 15,000 kilometers to nest only here in the high Arctic. Greeley made notes on his next find, the wildflowers that explode on these hillsides for only a few weeks each year.
Greeley's journal at the Library of Congress, he talks about how everyone went through a brief flower craze when they were gathering flowers and pressing them to bring south. And sure enough, there were still dried flowers in Greeley's journal.
Any life here is a miracle. This polar desert receives less precipitation than the Great Sahara itself.
Well, 120 years later, the cart is obviously going to have changed from when Greeley left it. But this area is so dry, so cold, that it will not have rotted. The metal pieces of the wheel will be intact. There'll be a lot of old timbers that'll still be around.
Nothing, it seems, ever disappears on Ellesmere. Clues can last for centuries. Even the dead find it hard to hide.
I don't like this because it makes me feel like a shaman, and I'm not a shaman.
The muskox skull may be centuries old, a sign that the cart itself is still out there somewhere. And so Jerry presses on, certain that clues to Greeley's demise lie ahead. This skull will not be the last reminder of the life and death struggle that is Ellesmere Island. Jerry Kobalenko continues his search for Greeley's cart. He travels westward on Ellesmere Island and enters a terrain where hooves, not wheels, are the best way to get around. This shaggy creature is the muskox, perhaps the perfect extremophile. It is the island's largest land mammal. The Inuit named it Umingmak, or the bearded one. Its remarkable fur has two linings, allowing it to survive temperatures that plunge to minus 50 degrees Celsius. For this species, the Ice Age never ended.
Muskox really are Ice Age relics. Their prehistoric cave paintings come to life. They're contemporaries of the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger. When you look at them, you sometimes think they're just standing there patiently awaiting the next ice age.
To Greeley, the muskox were a miracle, easy to hunt and full of meat. His men killed 31 in a single month and then waited for winter to drag them back to camp. Jerry has spent years planning his search for Greeley's cart. But after 7 days scouring Lake Hazen, he's found no clue to Greeley's time here.
If you look for something up here, you tend not to find it. So it's not the finding of the cart. It's the quest for something that really drives me here.
But where did Greeley go next? Lake Hazen is vast, 500 square kilometers in size. The cart could be anywhere. When it broke down, Greeley carried on undaunted, and Jerry follows. He moves northwards, following Greely towards Mount Barbeau in the United States range. Greely's men were suffering now. Their feet hurt, some raw and bleeding from too much walking. 2 men were forced back to Fort Conger, while Greely and the others forged on. Jerry follows them into an Ice Age landscape. No one knows if the glaciers of Ellesmere are the remains of the last great age of ice that ended 10,000 years ago. In fact, no one knows how many glaciers are on the island. There could be hundreds, but their power is undeniable. Like mammoth, slow-moving bulldozers, they scoured this landscape, leaving behind boulders the size of houses, scattered erratically on these flat, barren plateaus. And here they serve a unique purpose. The rocks trap the sun's heat. Plants take root and thrive on these small islands of warmth. To us, rocks are solid, but to moss, they are full of holes, filled with life-giving moisture. This boulder is like a greenhouse, heating up during the day and staying warm all night. It creates a microclimate, and often, even when there's snow on the ground, allows insects, like the caterpillar, to come alive. These are called woolly bears, another extremophile designed especially for survival in the cold.
Who'd imagine down south caterpillars crawling around in the snow? But if you watch these guys carefully, you see how they meticulously stick on black rocks where it's warm. So they not only have the chemistry, the natural antifreeze to survive here, but they're also smart in a simple way.
Jerry heads north into a mountain range buried in ice. Greely never got this far, but Jerry can't resist the lure of a new challenge, even though climbing alone is risky. These mountains are called nunataks, and only the tips of their peaks are visible above 900 meters of ancient glacial ice. The most unique mountain of them all is Mount Barbeau, 150 kilometers west of Fort Conger. At 2,600 meters, it is the largest mountain in North America east of the Rockies. It's known as the Mecca of mountaineering. Everest may be tougher to climb, but there is no mountain in the world harder to reach than Mount Barbeau, and Jerry has never been here before. If he reaches the top, he will see more of Ellesmere Island in a minute than he has seen in 15 years.
I've always said that I go for high latitudes, not high altitudes. And here I'm both. And what a night, what a night.
Jerry reaches the summit at 2 in the morning, one of the first to climb it in the 21st century, and the only one to ever bring along a television camera. This haunting panorama has never been filmed before now.
From here, it's all downhill to the Rocky Mountains to the west, and all downhill to Mexico to the south. We're 8,700 feet at the top of the world. You just see this endless plain of white rolling on into forever with just a few little rocky peaks or nunataks sticking out of the sheet. It's a very austere world, strangely beckoning and also hostile at the same time.
From the summit of Mount Barbeau, Jerry can see the route Greely and his men took to escape Ellesmere. For him, the mystery prevails. Why did so many of Greely's men perish? And how can one man thrive while others are destroyed by the same ice world? Jerry Kobalenko heads south along the east coast of Ellesmere Island, following the Greely expedition's escape route. In the spring of 1883, their rescue ship fails to arrive. After 721 days alone, Greely orders his men into a ragtag flotilla of boats. They will head south through more than 400 kilometers of ice-choked waters. Their destination is a small outcrop of rock called Pym Island. "25 men, 40 days' food, and not a single sailor." Greely earns the men's hatred by making mistakes. The boats get trapped on an ice floe which drifts aimlessly for a month, as their food runs dangerously low. One crewman writes of Greely, "This man, I cannot call him a gentleman, comes among us like a serpent in Eden and creates eternal hatred towards himself."
They thought their commander was insane, and in fact, there was a little bit of a conspiracy with the doctor and some others to have Greely declared insane. But what they didn't realize was that the supply ship was not blocked by ice, but that it had been caught in the ice and crushed like a walnut is crushed by a nutcracker. And so it was at the bottom of Kane Basin. There was nobody coming for them. Greely had no way of knowing this.
Incredibly, after a grim 59-day journey, they reached their destination safely, Pym Island, on Ellesmere's southeast coast. Ancient stones are thrown together to create a tiny makeshift shelter. Their roof is a tarpaulin, stretched over their last boat. 6 months of darkness lie ahead, and just 2 months of food.
There are 25 guys inside the stone wall under a tarpaulin, insulated with snow blocks. They had a scale that measured to the 16th of an ounce. So the guy next to you would not get one pea or one sliver of bully beef more than you.
They seem to have opened some of their tin cans anyway. The really old-fashioned way. They took a knife, and they cut across, and then they peeled back the corners.
Now, with only a month of daylight remaining, Greely orders his men to find food anywhere they can. Most look for supplies left by other expeditions, with little luck. The ice begins to clog the waters. The strongest take rifles and look for anything to kill. In a region with names like Thank God Harbor and Lifeboat Cove, no one gives this place a hopeful name. But there is food here. One soldier builds a net to catch shrimp-like creatures. They become a staple of their meager diet. But just one day's walk away, there is an answer to their prayers. This is a polynia. Strong tidal currents keep this water open all year, creating a magnet for game on an island where no creature ever hibernates.
This is definitely something you don't want to do at 40 below. 40 below kayak. It's what adventurers who haven't been nice to their mothers are sentenced to in hell. Here, kayakers tend to be very conservative because if anything happens, you're basically dead.
Polynias are the true oases of the Arctic. Walrus congregate here in herds, and just a few of these massive mammals could have supplied Greely's men with enough meat and blubber to survive all winter. But they're also dangerous. Able hunters, they eat seals.
In a kayak, walrus are really the only danger. Walrus are in fact the most dangerous animal in the Arctic. Their heads are just huge and their eyes are big and bloodshot and they just stare at you and you're just kind of wondering what they think.
They're also very clever, using their tusks to haul their huge weight onto ice floes. Weighing in at over a ton, they're strong enough to flip any boat or kayak that comes near.
The explorers told stories of walrus taking a man between his flippers and sucking all the flesh off his face like they do with clams.
This polynia could have fed Greely's men for months, and yet they never found it. Just a day's walk from their camp. Polynias attract every kind of creature. The tempering warmth of open water even helps keep the surrounding hills clear of snow, allowing muskox to feed here as well.
There are so many muskox not far away that a much more competent explorer who came 15 years later established hunting camps not far from this area. So had Greely come here and worked this area a little bit more, it's very likely they would all have survived.
Greely, it seems, had more faith in men than nature. Now desperate, he orders his men to find any food left by previous expeditions, no matter how far away. In the end, his tragic mistakes would cost the lives of 19 men. Spring at the Polynia on southeastern Ellesmere Island. Dozens of species begin to gather here, rejoicing in the new warmth. This smorgasbord of wildlife was ignored by the ill-fated Greely expedition. No animal here need fear their rifles. The hunters were too weak to leave their camp, even to save their own lives.
Greely expected to be rescued, and so their thought was, okay, we have a certain amount of food, let's try to stretch it out. They would have been much better served by coming in here and hunting the seals or hunting the walrus that would be around the Polynia. But they didn't understand the place. They had no idea this inner bay was so rich, and they starved to death what was really a one-day walk from here.
By the spring of 1884, none of the men is strong enough to walk for more than an hour or two. This lonesome cove had become their prison. A few animals wander within rifle range of the camp, but it's too little, too late.
Greeley's Camp Clay is the most haunted place I've ever seen.
Sealskin pants are boiled and eaten. Greeley, like most of the men, is too weak to even get out of his sleeping bag. And when a man dies of starvation, he's kept in Greeley's bag until he becomes too cold. Delirium seizes the men, and food theft is common. Ultimately, Greeley is forced to execute a Private Henry for stealing only a few mouthfuls of food. Three weeks later, on June 22, 1884, the rescue ship arrives. Its captain doubts that anyone could have survived a third winter without new supplies, and he prepares for the worst. They find only 6 men left. 19 have died. Miraculously, Greeley himself has survived by sheer force of will. The emaciated survivors are brought on board ship. So are the dead, and here the crew discovers an awful secret. Some of the bodies seem to have been sliced up for food. Greeley denies any knowledge, and so do the rest of his men. At home, news headlines call it the shame of the nation. But Greeley himself is promoted to brigadier general. In the end, he never returns to the Arctic and dies in 1935 at the venerable age of 91. After 3 years of scientific study on Ellesmere Island, Greeley never did learn the Arctic's singular lesson. Life survives here only by adapting and becoming part of the Arctic, thriving on its extreme conditions. Humility is the only rule. Those who disobey disappear. But unlike many who came before him, Jerry Kobolenko has adapted. He too is an extremophile and has made this his own personal Everest. And unlike Greeley, he keeps coming back.
I try to take what the Arctic throws at me in stride. You feel not that you have conquered the land, but that the place has allowed you to travel through it. My worst fear is the day I come here and I find I no longer enjoy it. Eventually you reach the age when this sort of travel is too hard a life for you. That's the thing that I'm most afraid of.
The nameless skull that inspires Jerry Kobolenko to return again and again to his mountain of an island rests on a carpet of lush green moss. Nitrogen is in short supply in the lean Arctic topsoil, and here the land itself literally sucks it out of the bone. On Ellesmere, death always nourishes life. It is nature's great mystery. In a mysterious land, a place forgotten by time, lives one of nature's greatest secrets. Many believe it's only a legend, but there are those who have seen it, appearing out of mist and jungle like a ghost to haunt this exotic, emerald world as a living reminder of nature's power and magic. At the beginning of time, the whole world was white with ice and snow. Then Raven flew down from the heavens and made the world green, as it is now. But he also wanted to make something to remind him of the beginning and its whiteness. So on these islands, he went among the bears, the black bears, and every 10th one he turned white. That way he could look at them and remember the world as it once was. And then Raven issued a decree. The white bears would live here forever in peace. On the Pacific coast of Canada, 700 miles north of Vancouver, British Columbia, and impossible to reach except by boat or airplane, lie the Mid-Coast Islands. It's a place so isolated, so removed, it's called the Forgotten Coast. Since the last ice age, these islands have remained uninhabited, except for First Nations people who have thrived here in one of the richest, most diverse ecosystems on Earth. It's a rugged, wild landscape of towering slopes, deep fjords, and lush valleys, teeming with life, the most abundant to be found anywhere in North America. On every shoreline, a jungle of moss-laden old-growth forest forms an impenetrable barrier. Behind it, a prehistoric world is revealed. These coniferous giants are the last reminder of a forest of cedar and spruce that once carpeted the earth. But in this land of giants, only the sea rules. Here, a delicate interplay between fresh and salt water nurtures hundreds of species. From the microscopic to the majestic. Here, the raw, wild power of nature inspired the creation of one of the world's most distinct cultures. Cedar burial boxes are hidden throughout this island labyrinth. Ancient remains of the forefathers of the Kitasoo First Nation, who have called this place home since the Raven first turned this world green. In all of ancient America, only the cultures of the Aztec and Inca equal the sophistication of the Kitasoo, one of many Northwest tribes who embraced this rich land and celebrated it in a rich culture. In their world, nature is a generous spirit, capable of transforming itself into living, breathing entities to ensure the constant return of abundant food resources, like the salmon. Today, the Kitasoo live in the village of Klemtu. the only human presence for hundreds of miles in any direction. On the surface, a modern, thriving community. But life here is, as it's always been, a daily ritual of harvesting nature's bounty. Like all life on the mid-coast, salmon is the primary food source in Klemtu, still smoked the old way, in cedar shacks over cedar shakes for hours on end. The raven, eagle, wolf, and orca, traditional symbols of the band, and the potlatch, an ancient celebration to welcome new chiefs or remember old ghosts, also remain important and sacred. The Mid-Coast Islands are home, a place where nature is rich and tangible. To the Kitasoo, it is always there, with one exception.
As old as I am, I've never seen a live one, but my son has seen it, you know.
That's when I seen it in Indian River. There was a whole bunch of us that stopped then to watch it.
I've only saw it twice, and that's the only time I've seen it, not very close.
It just never happened, you know, and I never really knew about them myself either, you know, and I never ever went looking for it.
Mysterious, elusive. Even the people who live here have rarely seen it. And those lucky enough to meet the ghost bear of the rainforest, so says another legend, are given the gift of predicting the future. In the land of the Kitasoo, all animals have a special significance. The raven, eagle, wolf, and orca are powerful symbols of life in one of the richest and wildest places on Earth. But the ghost bear is special. It defines this land and the people as rare as the bear itself.
The bear is part of the symbol of the Kitasoo, and it's a very, very sacred symbol to us. It's part of our strength, just like the symbol of our 4 crests we have. It's a symbol of where we get our strength. I saw the first white bear as a child. That's where I first seen my white bear.
Only here, in the rainforests of the Mid-Coast Islands, lives a unique subspecies of the black bear, so isolated for so long from mainland bears that every 10th one, as says the legend, is indeed white. This 5-year-old male, a teenager in bear years, is not an albino, or even a cousin of the polar bear. Biologists have tried for over a century to solve the riddle of how and why its coat turned white, with no success. We don't even know how many there are. Appropriate characteristics for a ghost. All we know for sure is that they only live here, in a world, as the Kitasoo say, put together by the raven. Our teenager appears to be enjoying a good scratch, but he's actually marking his home territory. Marked trees are signposts in the bear community and a practical way to prevent confrontations before they occur. The scent he leaves on this tree will let other bears know whose home this is and how big the current resident is. In nature, size is everything, and if a larger, older bear does come along, he too might mark this tree, telling our teenager it might be wise to move on. It's a lesson learned well by the Kitasoo, who clearly marked their own territory here many centuries ago.
We're in a place known to us Kitasoo as Disju, and it's a gathering place of the Kitasoo people. It's an identity thing, you know, with our people. I only knew of it when I was about 16 or 17, and I was out trapping with my father out here, and he brought me here too, and that was the first I ever saw this. You know, like it's a last remaining of what our ancestors had when we lived all around this area. It's all part of our territory, the whole thing, everything, you know, like we exist from the sea. We live on the land.
Bears do rely heavily on food from the sea, especially during the annual salmon spawn. But right now, the streams are too low, and all a bear or fish can do is wait for the late summer rains to fill them up. Some salmon have made headway, and catching the early arrivals is quite possible, if he can find one that matches his own size. It's also possible this 2-year-old cub has a white sister, brother, mother, or father. Although the origin of the recessive gene that turned the black bear's coat white remains a scientific question mark, fact is, the black bears here can and do create white offspring. In the bear hierarchy, white or black makes no difference, and an older bear is just a bigger bear who's found someone poaching his territory. For the cub, it means the end of a day's fishing. Peering down from their treetop vantage points, bald eagles also wait eagerly for the salmon spawn to really begin. If our teenager appears nervous, it's not because hunters are stalking the forest. Few do, but hunting is allowed here. And although the white bear is protected by law, black bears also carry the recessive white gene. Problem is, how would you know? The Kitasoo have never hunted the white bear. And elders still tell stories about its sacred spirit.
I've always heard them talking about a white bear. That's why my grandparents used to tell me, said not to hurt them or do anything to them because maybe there's something special about them. There's a reason why they're different from the others.
Only here, bears have no fear of humans and may have no concept of fear at all. When he does see us, he makes a habit of looking us straight in the eye. In all of nature, there is, perhaps, no experience like it. These temperate rainforests produce 4 times more life than any other on Earth. They exist because these islands are the first landmass moisture-laden winds hit after an unbroken 9,000-mile journey across the Pacific Ocean, which means a massive amount of rainfall, over 50 feet of it a year. From California to Alaska, the entire West Coast was once a continuous, gigantic forest. But other than here, most of it is long gone. Tall stands of ancient timber dominate the landscape, denying sunlight and easy access. In this temperate jungle, only 4-legged creatures can travel easily. Where sunlight does break through, mostly along stream banks and tidal flats, over 500 varieties of flowers, shrubs, and bushes thrive, nurturing man, beast, and the forest itself. But without a doubt, the red cedar is the tree of life. Hundreds of years of slow growth create a wood soft, pliable, yet so straight-grained, the Kitasoo learned to peel off 2-inch planks 20 feet long, leaving these trees alive to grow for another millennium. 1,000 years before Christianity, the Kitasoo were building cedar-hewn houses, dugout canoes, and carving into history one of the world's great artistic cultures.
Everything that makes us what we are is all around us. The medicines they gather from the forests, the food they gather from the seas. It sustained our people for, thousands and thousands of years. If you talk about the food that you get out of the ocean, the medicines and the materials that you get from the forest, they're all important. They played an important role in our people for as long as our people have been here.
If you take the land away from me, then I may be gone too, because the land looks after everything, the rivers, meat, berries, traditional items such as herbs that we use for medicine. All of that, are nurtured by the land.
By reaping only what the rain and sea had sown, the most complex civilization to ever emerge without benefit of agriculture was created here. Living from nature, they depended on the earth for signs, like a bear's arrival on the coast. Rarely will the white bear come down from the mountains, preferring to feast on berries and insects until the salmon spawn beckons. Yet wherever it goes, the bear is a guide and a teacher.
Well, it represents many things. Now, the bear tells you that there are berries there. The bear tells you because of their presence there that there's salmon bearing river. All of those things, those are, when you see a bear, it's a good sign that there's life somewhere, that indicate salmon berries and stuff that, nobody would know of.
In a few short months, hibernation begins, and this scarred 15-year-old's instincts have moved into overdrive, telling him it's time to eat as many fish as possible, as fast as possible. During the salmon spawn, a bear will consume about 700 fish, increasing his body fat by almost 40%. When this old veteran settles down in his winter den, he'll sleep until spring, burning off the body fat he's storing up now. Females will give birth during hibernation, and the cubs must nourish themselves on their mother's enriched high-fat milk until she wakes up. Life has been good to our veteran. He's seen a lot of summers come and go, and should live to see many more. Bears in the wild can live almost 25 years, but here, with so much food around, they have a good chance of living a lot longer. Some bears never fish at all, keeping an eye on smaller bears' success instead. It's not lazy. For a big bear, just practical. But our veteran shouldn't worry. At over 400 pounds, he's a big bear. Summer is the only season when rainfall is measured in inches rather than feet, making streams unpredictably rise and fall and stalling the salmon's run for home. The best time to catch them is yet to come. Black bears rarely forage in the heat of the day, preferring early morning or evening to feed. Their black coats soak up the hot sun like a sponge, and summer days are better spent in the cool forest canopy, fast asleep. A white bear with a white coat doesn't have as much of a problem with the heat, giving him more opportunities to feed undisturbed. Today, the sun is too hot even for our teenager, but he has his own ideas about cooling off. Time off is a concept even a bear understands. He should enjoy it while he can. Soon enough, this pool will be teeming with thousands of visitors. As the Kitasoo say, they live on the land, but live from the sea. Halibut and herring, crab, prawns, sea urchins, and sea cucumber are harvested throughout the year. But the mainstay of all life in these islands is the salmon. And right now, everyone and everything waits for its annual return.
I can understand why they picked this area for their main village site. They have resources here available for them year-round. Salmon not only nourished our people, it also gave us the opportunity to trade with other communities for things such as grease and soap berries and seaweed. You know, there are other things that we don't have that aren't local to our territory here, and it gave us that opportunity to travel to other places and trade.
We can't see it yet, but out there, in the depths of the Pacific, a movable feast is coming right at us. The orca have traveled far to be the first in a long line of animals to gorge on massive numbers of spawning salmon. The life of the salmon is actually just one long round trip. A patient kingfisher pauses to check their progress. In this stream, there are now more than enough salmon to go around. Five species of salmon, sockeye and coho, chinook, chum, and pink, return in the millions each year to these islands to lay their eggs. Somehow, after traveling thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean, they've returned to the exact same streams they left 4 years ago, weighing less than an ounce. It's another mystery that science has yet to solve. Some believe they find their way home by smell. Decaying earth, rotting logs, salty mists, and wildflower blooms. Perhaps it's the rainforest they smell. Bears have the keenest sense of smell of any mammal. In fact, their face is almost all nose, and for them, the scent of salmon must be overpowering. They're also extremely intelligent animals. Although still young in bear years, our teenager has been around long enough to know where the stream is shallow and most likely to be packed with fish. His size is deceiving. Over a short distance, he can outrun a racehorse, but catching a sleek fish in calm water is destined for failure from the start. This bear knows a better spot. The Kitasoo know the good fishing spots too. Long before the use of nets, they built massive fish traps, piling rocks by hand, one by one, at the mouths of streams. At low tide, the salmon were trapped inside the shallow enclosure, allowing the Kitasoo to harvest them easily without needing a net, hook, or spear. It was a naturally practical idea. A young bald eagle is also taking advantage of the salmon's upstream struggle. He'd better, or he too could risk not surviving the winter. And winter is not far away. In the land of the ghost bear, life is complex and magical, ancient and timeless. Only nature decides when the rules will change. The autumn rains have arrived, and with them, no guarantee they'll ever end. Soon the downpour will fill the streams right up, and this time they'll stay up. The salmon harvest is about to begin. The autumn rains have arrived and will last until spring, with month after month passing without a sign of the sun. In the mystical half-light that remains, days are marked only by the cycles of the rain's intensity. Ferociously wet and relentlessly gray. Blurred by thick mist and fog, the separation between forest and ocean becomes indistinguishable. But in nature, there is no separation, and every living thing on the Rain Coast ultimately responds to the same ecological rhythm. For the bear, nature's timing is perfect, and now that the runoff remains constant, the life cycle of the rainforest is at its height. The spawn is gorging season for a lot of animals, and for all of them, finally, the salmon are on the move. If this black bear isn't careful, he could easily slip and drown, but he doesn't miss a step. Even for bears, fishing is a learned experience, with instincts enhanced by education. This bear has probably fished here since he was a cub and memorized every submerged rock ledge and eddy in this canyon. Places only this bear would know, where exhausted salmon escape the relentless current in calmer water, sandwiched between boulders. In there, salmon are served buffet style. The feast is so rich, bears discriminate between male and female salmon, ignoring the males to gorge on the rich red row of females. They'll usually eat 3 or 4 times a day, resting for long periods in between, but instincts remind them never to relax. Next year's salmon spawn will be a long time coming. The Kitasoo have been fishing these waters for almost as long as the bears. And their instincts, too, are telling them it's time to stock up.
Food fishing is important for our community. We need this out here just to survive, to continue to live in the community as remote as ours. My father-in-law is fishing with me, so we're going to split it between the two of us. This area is actually rich in all sorts of sea resources. There's halibut to be caught out here, and rock cod, and there's spring salmon. As long as there have been Kitasoo, they've used this bay.
Our veteran has found his good fishing spot, too. Better yet, he's eating undisturbed, and it's fairly obvious why. His scarred nose bears the mark of a long and eventful life. For 15 years, he's remained king of the world. His world. The salmon struggle comes at a price, and fish that have injured themselves on rocks are everywhere. This 10-pound sockeye will do just fine. His paws are the size of baseball gloves, but they have the dexterity of human hands, allowing him to handle a salmon like a ground ball. Perhaps bears are closer to us than we'd like to think. The Kitasoo people think so. In their world, nature is a friend, and animals have spirits and can speak. It is a timeless state of grace, perfect, fragile, and traditionally maintained.
I think that when I come out here now, it's just starting to begin to get that feeling of tradition that we have out here. It's very important. You talk to the elders and they'll tell you that it sustained our people for, you know, thousands and thousands of years.
To the outside world, the white bear is another of nature's curiosities, and not, as it should be, a living reflection of ancient times, when legends were born of animals offering us the power of their knowledge. For the modern world, this bear is truly a ghost. The first salmon run of the season has been a good one, with more to come. Percy Starr's son Godfrey has pulled over 800 sockeye out of Kitasoo Bay, enough to keep many in the community busy canning and smoking into the fall. For these fishermen, it's time to head home. Autumn adds new colors to the spectrum of the rainforest. And as the salmon run begins to slow, so too does the life cycle of these islands, but not the streams. Their thunder will continue to roll down to the sea until summer returns. It's been a good fishing season for our teenager, too. After gaining almost 60 pounds in 6 weeks, he's stuffed with fish, and probably not too interested in eating another one for quite a while. He's very content and well prepared for winter. When he wakes up in the spring, he'll discover the world exactly as he left it. Except he'll be hungry once again. For the people in Klemtu, winter's perpetual rainstorms mark the longest season of the year. But the salmon will see them through. Before arriving home, fishing boats radio ahead, letting the community know they're loaded with fish and to come down to the docks to share in the harvest. Families take only what they need, jarring, canning, smoking, and freezing their primary food supply, which should last until next year. By the end of the spawn, hundreds of dead salmon have been flushed downstream, washing up on the island's rocky coastline and tidal flats. Down here, the scavenging is always good, and fresh salmon carcass deposited by the tide is about as close a bear can get to home delivery. Here in their island fortress, forgotten by time, the white bear lives happily in peace, just as the raven guaranteed over 10,000 years ago. There's an old Kitasoo story about a woman who married a bear. She was very beautiful, but young and foolish. One day, while watching a bear struggling to catch fish in a deep pool, she laughed at him, not knowing he hadn't eaten in days. The elders became angry and forced the woman to marry the bear and take care of him. At first, she was very unhappy, but she grew to love the bear and bore him 2 children, a boy and a girl. These were the first people to live in this place, and they promised never to laugh at nature again. No one really knows how or why its coat turned white. We don't even know how many exist. All we do know is what the Kitasoo have known since the beginning of time. The ghost bear haunts this rainforest, reminding all of us how nature once was, and at least here, still is. The cold, murky, plankton-rich waters off Canada's east coast are the richest fishing grounds in the world. Cod, herring, capelin, tuna, and many other species have been harvested in massive numbers here since the day the North American continent was first discovered. But there is one other creature that harvests these waters, and has done so since the beginning of time. In the past, these giant hunters of the deep arrived here silently, mysteriously, only to become another of the hunted. Today, there is a ban on whaling in Canada's oceans, but this place remains where whales go to die. Long before Europeans appeared off Canada's east coast, Great pods of whales were migrating north every year from their Caribbean calving grounds. Right whales to feed in the Bay of Fundy, and humpbacks to the Gulf of Maine and the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. To 15th century Basque whalers, the right whale was the right whale to hunt. It didn't sink when harpooned, giving up its blubber for oil lamps and bone for women's corsets, easier than any other whale. As North America was colonized, great maritime traditions were born. One of them, the autumn whale hunt. Supply and demand seemed limitless, and whalers complied, killing thousands every year for over 500 years. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Atlantic was tapped out. Whale populations had been reduced to 10% of their historic levels, and the northern right whale, once numbering in the hundreds of thousands, was almost extinct. Today, whale watching has replaced whale hunting, but for the right whale, wholesale slaughter has taken its toll. With about 300 known animals remaining, the right is the world's most endangered whale, and the numbers continue to decline. More right whales die from entanglement in fishing nets and ship collisions than are born, driving the species closer to extinction and setting the stage for a tragedy of global proportion. But for the last 20 years, a new breed of maritimer has surfaced, dedicated to solving the dilemma of an ancient animal's survival in a modern world. They are the whale doctors, and their job is to get as close as possible to the planet's largest, most powerful animal, and free them from fish nets that can maim or kill. Out here, more than a whale's life is on the line. This is a dangerous occupation.
Okay, whoop. Cut! It's in his mouth, okay. Cut it! Get him out of here! Cut it back. No, never mind. We're okay. We're okay.
In Tiverton, Nova Scotia, on the east coast of the Bay of Fundy, science, governments, and fishermen have come together to discuss the realities of traditional maritime life, conflicting with the survival of a species.
That's right.
Dr. Moira Brown of East Coast Ecosystems, a right whale research group, hosts the conference.
This is the only large whale species that is in danger of going extinct in our grandchildren's lifetime. There is increasing levels of awareness amongst the shipping industry and the fishing industry that these animals are not extinct. They're still alive, they're out there, and they're struggling.
Fishermen have come to this conference because they are the front line. It's their nets and their livelihood whales become entangled in. Freeing a whale from a fisherman's net would be impossible without their cooperation. Dr. Charles Stormy Mayo of the Center for Coastal Studies is also on the front line, disentangling whales for over 15 years.
The problem we all will have when we see entangled animals, since they are pretty precious creatures if they're right whales, is trying to figure out if it's towing gear, whether it's really superficial or whether it is not.
I think I'd rather be talking about untangling whales than doing it.
Dr. John Lean of Newfoundland is the first person to ever disentangle a whale. And since then, he's saved more whales than anyone else in the world.
I was working at the university, and fishermen begin to call the university and say, I've got a trapped whale. And they'd say, well, why call us? And they said, well, I called fisheries, I've called wildlife, I've called the Coast Guard, and nobody will help me. And at that time in Newfoundland, fishermen said it's the worst problem we really have with the fixed gear, cod traps, and gillnet fishery.
The meeting adjourns to a more appropriate setting, crossing the Bay of Fundy to Grand Manan Island in New Brunswick for on-the-water training.
Hey, whales at 2 and 3 o'clock.
Suddenly, the training turns real. Entangled in fishing gear from a lobster trap, a 2-year-old female right whale surfaces in front of them.
You're not going to believe what we got here. Entangled right whale.
The world's best disentanglers are in the right place at the right time and quickly prepare to hook on to the fishing line. But the whale dives. When it surfaces, they're ready to try another strategy. Grapple onto the line to secure a marker buoy.
Yes, yes, yes. Both of you get it. Okay, to starboard now, to starboard. Starboard. Okay, I got it here. Neutral!
They attach the buoy, making it easier to keep track of the whale.
No, we're drifting.
Now the real chase is on.
I haven't got a good purchase. I think we still got the line running. Still got the line running.
There we go.
Yeah, we do.
We're in a lot better shape than we usually are. I think what we're going to try to do is to cut the right side to start out with.
Using a Zodiac inflatable, the best platform from which to disentangle a whale, Stormy Mayo plans to get as close as possible and cut away the fishing gear with a knife attached to a long pole. When the whale surfaces again, the team will move in.
Yes, yes, yes!
Come on, come on.
He's on him, he's on him, he's got him.
Mayo succeeds in cutting the line and hauls in the gear. This disentanglement was a complete success. For the best disentanglers in the world, it's been a good day. But as John Lean knows, this was an easy one.
Boy, that was impressive.
Newfoundland, where Canada's east coast tumbles into the sea, and where humpback whales come to dine, like they have for thousands, if not millions of years. Humpbacks feed in packs, herding fish into compact schools, forcing them to the surface and then devouring them in one gulp. Humpbacks eat massive amounts of capelin, a small fish also eaten by cod, the fish that has driven a way of life here for over 500 years. Ever since there was a Newfoundland fishing industry, humpbacks have been entangling themselves in fishermen's nets. In the past, it wasn't a problem. Kill the whale, but lose the net. Today, with the cod fishery in crisis, the loss of a single net is a disaster, like the loss of a single whale.
We lost half our trap, right? We lost $5,000. And it's not only $5,000 on the trap, you'd lose maybe a week's fishing because you had to, what we call, you bring it in on the meadow and you had to go get twine and you had to try to fix it up again, right? And that's one of the worst nightmares that a fisherman could ask for.
Yes. That's how close it was to shore.
Dr. John Lean of Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, has saved more whales and more fishing nets than anyone else in the world. It all began in 1978 with a phone call from a fisherman with a humpback entangled in his net. For 3 months, the whale had struggled to free itself, and no one could solve the problem. Could Lean?
Got it okay, Ben? Got it.
John Lean was no whale expert. In fact, he was a biologist studying seabirds, but neither was anyone else. Armed with a sawed-off hockey stick with a hook on one end, some garden clippers, a snorkel, and not much else, he decided to give it a try.
I hadn't done anything with whales except sit beside one for a month. And so we did some figuring, and I thought we could build some equipment. So we went back to the university, built some equipment to let the whale go.
One whale led to another, and Lean became a one-of-a-kind expert.
The problem is largely one of teenage whales, and it's probably just reckless driving, basically. Over and over again, it's this size humpback that gets caught in gear.
Incredibly, Lean was soon disentangling 40 whales a year.
Okay, that's
Over time, he perfected his techniques and learned that no two whales or disentanglements are ever the same. This humpback is trapped in a gill net, anchored to the seabed, and unable to move. If it's not freed, it will die.
Every time I go to an entrapment, still, I'm afraid. I'm not afraid of the whale, and I'm not afraid of the fisherman, but you're just afraid you're going to fail. There's a lot on the line, and there's no recipe, there's no set way. You really are figuring it out each time.
Humpbacks are one of the most mild-mannered of the large whales, but too much prodding on the surface can arouse even the gentlest of giants. The whale swims away free as Dr. John Lean dries himself off. Lean's success has saved whales and changed attitudes.
And he said, you know, boys, we're here to help you, right? And a lot of the fishermen, and even I was really, you know, like reluctant to even let him aboard the boat.
It really did take a while to convince them that we were saving their fishing gear as well as the whale, and that was important to them.
You get a humpback whale in a $10,000 trap, you can lose it within an hour. And John really done us a favor.
Here we have a legacy of feeling not so good about environmental groups who protest our seal hunt. And they were suspicious that, yeah, here's another save the seal, save the whale type operation.
Lean's efforts to save whales and nets created a new relationship between nature and culture in Newfoundland. He's added to that relationship by pioneering technology to help prevent entanglements, like the acoustic pinger, which warns the whale that a fishing net is nearby.
There's a beep goes out every 3 seconds, right? And this one worked really good. All you do is you snap this onto your about 3 fathom under water on your skirt lines, and you let them down, and you have 5 on your trap, and you'd have 5 more on your leader. So you'd have around 10 on a cod trap. And they work really good. You'd be surprised to see them working. When you see the whales coming, and when they pick up the beeper, they just turn from your trap.
After more than 20 years and hundreds of successful rescues, John Lean is known as the godfather of whale disentanglements. But perhaps his greatest success is turning a one-man, part-time job into a full-time rescue operation run by the Canadian Coast Guard, which means Lean's legacy will continue.
The best ones are always the ones where at the end the whale swims away just bare naked. It doesn't have anything on it. And you know that that animal has a very good chance, as good a chance as before he was caught. And then where you go to the house and have tea and you talk about it.
Before John Lean answered a phone call in 1978 from a frustrated fisherman, almost 50% of entangled humpbacks were dying in the net. Since then, 90% are swimming free. The highest tides in the world scour the rocky shores of the Bay of Fundy, shared by the provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and the state of Maine. It is a rich underwater ecosystem, supporting a vast diversity of marine life, and one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. Like Newfoundland's maritime culture, fishing has been a way of life here for centuries. And like the humpback, the northern right whale has been drawn to these waters for millennia. As many as 200, 2/3 of the world's most endangered whale population, spend the summer feeding in Fundy's plankton-rich waters. This is the greatest concentration of northern rights found anywhere on Earth. Yet no one knows where most of them come from. In fact, there's little we do know about these whales. Studying whales is a real challenge. Spending 99% of their lives underwater, there's no precise way to learn how they age, mate, or migrate. Even weighing them is a problem. With so many right whales in such a small area, another curious species has been attracted to the Bay of Fundy: the scientist. For over 15 years, Dr. Moira Brown has been studying right whales in the bay. Her work focuses on genetics.
We simply fire the arrow from the crossbow, and it hits the whale and bounces right off. And with it takes a little sample of skin. And that's actually just a huge amount of raw material with which to do genetic sampling. One of the things we'd like to do with the genetics study that we have going today is create a family tree for the living right whale. So within the next few years, we should be able to see exactly who's related to who.
One thing that is known for certain is that right whales feed and breed at the surface, putting them on a collision course with heavy commercial fishing and shipping activity in the bay. This is Staccato, a breeding-age female struck and killed by a ship in the spring of 1999. Over 25 years old, and the mother of at least 6 calves, Staccato was well known to scientists in the bay. A team from the Center for Coastal Studies in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, led by Dr. Stormy Mayo, conducted the autopsy.
It's really spectacular.
It is a sad paradox of whale science. The easiest way to study the animal is when it's dead on the beach. The autopsy reveals the whale's back and jaw had been broken by the force of the massive collision. Breeding-age females are the most valuable members of any endangered species, giving Staccato's death global impact. It's late summer, and Deborah Tobin of East Coast Ecosystems in Nova Scotia surveys the bay for right whales, monitoring their movements and searching for entangled animals. Suddenly, a right whale, identified as number 2710, is sighted dragging fishing gear. Tobin relays its coordinates to a disentanglement team standing by on the water. A multinational team is deployed. Moira Brown arrived from Lubec, Maine, where her summer research program is based. But for now, her science is forgotten. And Stormy Mayo, the most experienced right whale disentangler on the East Coast, has traveled north from Massachusetts. With help from above, the team quickly locates 2710. Then Stormy Mayo, here in the white helmet, gets to work. 2710 is a 2-year-old female, entangled in a single fishing line, running through her mouth, across the blowholes, and around the right flipper. The first order of business is to slow the whale down by kegging it.
In the old days, the way the whalers used to do it was to attach wooden kegs to a whale to slow it down after they'd harpooned it. And we're sort of using the same technique. The difference is we want the whale alive at the end of the day, whereas the whalers had a different objective. So instead of kegs, we're using these orange inflatable buoys. So that sort of maximizes our time to work with the whale.
2710 has become agitated and extremely evasive. She keeps diving and thrashing her tail at the surface, a warning to the disentanglers to keep their distance. The entangled lines are old and rotting. Every time they try to attach a kegging buoy, the line breaks free, frustrating their attempts to slow the whale.
But I don't know if we're going to get a shot at this whale again. You could see it worked, but the damn gear didn't hold. That's the reason we didn't do it earlier. I mean, we could have put pressure on earlier, but we wanted to see if we could get another attachment. But we knew the gear was compromised, and that's where our problem was.
But the rotting gear becomes a benefit.
Clear.
2710's own thrashing tears free 25 feet of line, creating a partial success. For the moment, the whale is out of danger. Meanwhile, the Skymaster spots another entangled right whale, number 1158, an adult female, dragging a metal pole and buoy.
Who popped up behind us while we were blowing up the inflatable. 58.
With 2710 out of danger, they pivot to investigate 1158.
They got the buoy out behind them. Stormy tossed the grapple. And let's see what they got.
This entanglement is not considered to be life-threatening. Suddenly, Skymaster spots another entangled whale, number 2030, another female. A quick assessment reveals that an entangled line has cut into her back, causing serious injury. There have never been so many entangled whales at one time, in one area. Multiple lines of fishing net have dug deeply into 2030, causing a massive gash on her back. It appears she's been towing this gear around for months, and the injury is life-threatening. A life and death struggle in the bay has begun. With light failing, a satellite buoy is attached to 2030 to track her overnight. Tomorrow is another day. Song of the Whale, a vessel supplied by the International Federation of Animal Welfare, has been tracking 2030 overnight. Stormy Mayo and his team in the Zodiac keg the whale quickly. Their plan is to grapple onto the line they've attached and pull themselves up to just behind her tail flukes. The added drag should tire her out and give them time to assess her condition. The whale tows their boat across the ocean. In whaling language, this is known as a Nantucket sleigh ride. Right whales have amazing flexibility, capable of touching their noses with their tails. Anytime the disentanglement team gets in front of those 2-ton flukes, their lives are in danger. But the risk is worth it, if 2030 can be saved.
I think all of us were just shocked at how bad her condition was and how sad she looked, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. She's been laboring for a very long time with a very bad situation, and one has to imagine in terrible pain. The cut is probably a maximum of 8 inches to 10 inches deep and perhaps 14 feet long. It's the worst I've ever seen.
No matter how injured the animal is, she remains incredibly strong and incredibly dangerous. A whale is a highly evolved, deeply sensitive animal. Each whale has its own personality and behaves differently when entangled. 2030 feels her pain, but she doesn't know the whale doctors are trying to help her.
She obviously knew we were there, and she didn't want us there. And it's an assumption that that's going through her mind, but what was not an assumption was her reaction, which was to slash wildly with her tail towards us. Certainly vintage right whale, immense power and precision.
The whale continues to dive for up to 10 minutes at a time, leaving the team helpless on the surface. Kegging 2030 and the Nantucket sleigh ride have not slowed the whale down, and the team cannot get close enough to cut away the damaging line. They take a break to talk strategy. A new technique is required. When 2030 surfaces, Mayo decides to approach her aggressively. He's equipped with a long pole with a razor-sharp, quick-release knife blade attached. The new idea is to hook a line, then release the blade. The team is working in front of the whale's tail now, in a position of extreme danger.
Clear. Okay, we're clear. Grab it, next time hold.
Finally, the knife blade is attached. The whale flees, but the team pursues her, grappling onto the line and pulling hard on the knife blade. Mayo pulls and pulls. Finally, the blade slices the line. 2030 is partially disentangled. But the line cutting deepest into the whale's body remains. It's taken all day to achieve a partial success. Now, with daylight fading, a new problem appears. Fog is moving into the bay. The kegging gear is taken off the whale and a satellite buoy attached. The team decides to stay on the bay overnight, tracking 2030, ready to try again at first light. "100 kilometers south in Bar Harbor, Maine, Disentanglement Director Bob Bowman tracks the whale's movements. 2030 appears to be leaving the bay for open ocean, heading south at 8 knots, fleeing those who would save her. Then fog blankets the bay completely, and the disentanglement is suspended. In Bar Harbor, the sun is still shining, and for Bowman, it's back to the drawing board. New tools need to be designed to cut the lines on 2030's back.
We've developed a variety of tools just out of necessity. You can't very often find off-the-shelf equipment that works very well for doing whale disentanglement. This particular one was just made especially for right whale 2030. And the way it would work is that it would hook into, you would use it to hook into a line. For instance, we'll just hook into this line on the boat here and hope we don't cut it. And then the pole will pull off. And you now have a knife attached. The other end of this rope could be attached to a large buoy or to a boat. It's going to cut very quickly. It will also lock in place. It won't even slide.
Meanwhile, up the coast in Lubeck, fog continues to be a problem. And there's a new one. A fisherman has reported sighting a dead whale. Immediately, a boat is sent out to investigate, but no one dares ask the question. Is it 2030?
No. Half-tide rock could be mixed in. You hadn't seen a dead whale floating around in here, have you?
No, haven't heard anyone mention about it.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Finally, they have their answer. A dead 3-ton basking shark that's been trapped in a net. Relief is tempered by the sight of the rotting shark.
It's got line all over it. So you can see the gills.
For the moment, 2030 is still alive, somewhere out there in the fog. Five days later, the fog has broken, and so has some good news. 2030 has returned to the Bay of Fundy. In Lubec, Maine, home base for scientists studying whales in the bay, Moira Brown calls Stormy Mayo with the news.
So she's pretty much right in the area that we were working with her last week. So she's come back up from the south. So she's a lot more accessible.
What you call the groove.
That's pretty close to what we call the groove, yeah. So she may well be in amongst other whales. And the Song of the Whale has returned to Graham and Ann. They returned to Graham and Ann today. So they'll also be available to go out and help with tracking.
That would be great.
All right, Stormy, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, and it looks like we're going to hopefully have a couple of good days to take a shot at this whale.
Thanks for your help.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The next morning, Stormy Mayo, Ed Lyman, and a new team member, Dave Matilla, return from Cape Cod.
You know, I'm getting less and less excited about going up with a pole anywhere where you end up falling back near the tail, because the tail is. I don't like the tail.
Found out, yeah.
I don't like the tail.
The team is ready to try again. Skymaster gets into position to spot 2030. To slow down the whale so they can work on it safely, the team has invented a harness to be thrown like a lasso over the tail and then tethered to a boat. It's risky business. No one has ever attempted to harness a large whale before. The first chance will be their best chance. Before the whale is aware of their presence and becomes agitated,
You taping? I'm taping.
they approach slowly, hoping not to startle her.
I'm trying to tape the flukes, yeah.
We are all concerned that her entanglement is so severe that she might not survive. And that's why we have been trying to throw all of our efforts at her entanglement. But the gear is embedded in her back and around her flippers, and it couldn't be more difficult to try and disentangle this whale. She also still has enough energy to use her tail to defend herself, because she doesn't know we're trying to help her.
They wait for their opportunity. Everything is in position. 2030 surfaces in front of them. The tail fluke comes up, and they drop the harness. But there's a hitch. One of the three lines doesn't release, creating a dangerous situation.
Pull, pull, pull! Fucker!
The whale dives, and if Mayo doesn't disengage their connecting line to the whale, 2030 could pull them under. The team waits for the whale to resurface and moves in to try again.
She's circling back.
2030 is an ornery, belligerent leviathan, refusing to cooperate. Again, failure.
Would you object if I had some shot?
All day, they try, and all day, they fail. The day ends slowly, with no success. Overnight, a new problem has emerged. Hurricane Floyd, lashing Florida's coast, has turned and is moving northward with the Bay of Fundy directly in its path. But Floyd isn't due yet, and dawn in Lubec brings a new day and another new strategy. But will this be their last chance to save 2030?
Oh, here it is. So we cinched up good.
That's it now.
Once again, they locate 2030 quickly, circling in the bay. Immediately, they begin to re-keg the animal. Taking a Nantucket sleigh ride, they move in to check her condition. By midday, they've attached more kegging gear to 2030 than to any other whale in history. Will they finally succeed in slowing her down? They move in to begin cutting at the lines causing the massive gash on the whale's back, using one of Bob Bowman's new knives. Unbelievably, 2030 dives, pulling all the boys under with her. She may be badly injured, but she remains incredibly strong.
Diving.
Another day with no success. And now the hurricane is on the horizon.
We've been on top of that whale on and off for 5 days, and we're awfully close, but she's awfully badly entangled, and so we leave her with an uncertain future.
Once again, a satellite buoy is attached to 2030, but the rescue is suspended until Hurricane Floyd passes. Hurricane Floyd, now downgraded to a tropical storm, still packs a punch, forcing boat traffic off the Bay of Fundy and halting any efforts to disentangle right whale 2030. When the storm clears, the whale has disappeared from the bay. Hurricane season signals the change to autumn in the Maritimes, and 2030 and 2710, both towing satellite tracking buoys, have begun their journey south to winter calving grounds off the north coast of Florida.
We unfortunately have had to abandon our efforts to 2030 right now. She has left the Bay of Fundy. But the good thing is that she does have a transmitter attached to her, a satellite transmitter, so we will be able to track her location. And if she does come near shore again, we can try and disentangle her.
A month later, the signal from 2030's satellite buoy stops moving, triggering a search to discover the whale's fate.
I got 2 o'clock.
Has the marker broken free? Or worse? 10 kilometers off the New Jersey coast, the buoy is located, but no 2030.
The snap broke off of it. That was one of the choices for losing it.
For the moment, 2030 remains out there in the open ocean. But the question remains, is she still alive? The answer comes a short time later, when 2030 is sighted.
Have you made an arrangement with...
Dead in the water, off the same New Jersey coast. Dense webs of fish netting are found wrapped around her flippers, and a nylon line stretches across her back, almost sawing her in half. The entanglement is worse, much worse than anyone expected. One of the planet's greatest ancient creatures, ravaged by a fish line. The summer began with a population of 60 breeding-age females. Now, only 57 remain. For the most endangered whale species on the planet, a catastrophic loss. Like landmines in a forgotten war zone, an unknown number of so-called ghost nets float, abandoned in the North Atlantic. Lost in storms, marker buoys cut by boat traffic, the nylon mesh continues to snare fish as it drifts silently across the ocean. Today, over 60% of right whales bear the white scars of net entanglements. There seems to be no escape.
If the northern right whale becomes extinct, it will be the direct result of our inability to stop it from happening. I think it would be, if you've spent any time at all out watching these animals in their natural environment, it's a wildlife spectacle, and as a country, I think Canada should value right whales and the fact that they spend a good 6 months of their lives in our waters as a national heritage.
It's tempting to cut now, it looks like.
But there are successes. In September, a month before 2030 dies, 1158 is disentangled from its net.
Got one, I heard him say.
Whoa, whoa. The whale just got really freed.
And on the same day, off the coast of Maine, Bob Bowman hauls in 2710 Satellite Boy with 95 feet of fishing line attached to it. Luckily, the whale has freed herself from most of her entanglement.
450, and there's no sign of any gear on this whale.
But John Lean and the others know that disentangling whales is only a band-aid treatment to a global problem. Biodegradable fishing nets, acoustic pingers to warn whales away from fish nets, and the rerouting of commercial shipping lanes around prime whale habitat are all a part of the solution. Until then, the whale doctors have more work ahead of them.
Whales generally have come to sort of symbolize everything that's right or wrong with the ocean. And in the past, we've abused them horribly by killing way too many and by killing them badly. And I think now people feel if there's hope for oceans, the whale is the symbol of that hope. If we can save whales, we can save oceans.
The giants of the deep have owned the oceans for millennia, living symbols of the untamed and mysterious. The humpback in Canada will survive, largely because the fishing industry in Newfoundland is declining. But the right whale cannot escape its tragic past, and at least for now, its tragic destiny.
It happens hundreds of times a year. Humans and bears get too close. The result can be an assault, a break and enter, even a death. But who is guilty in these incidents? Are bears the problem, or are they being provoked by humans? To find out, these bear experts will investigate 5 cases. They're looking for clues, using science and bear behavior to understand why these encounters happened, what drove a human or bear to attack, and what humans should do to prevent dangerous bear encounters. By solving these mysteries, they hope to determine whether these events were actually bear crimes. Many of Canada's bear attacks occur in British Columbia. This is grizzly bear country. And in 2000, the McLeod Lake area of central British Columbia was the scene of a gruesome grizzly bear attack. The victim's name is Max Tiley. He is confined to a wheelchair from injuries sustained during the attack. Max doesn't remember how the grizzly did this to him, but his family is eager to learn more about what happened so others can avoid the same danger. So we asked 2 experts to return to the scene of the attack to reconstruct the events second by second. They hope to solve the mystery. Was this a predatory bear or one acting defensively? And was human error to blame? Jim Corbett is a senior conservation officer in southern British Columbia.
Well, usually when you rubber bullet,
if there are bear police,
take off for a while, or
he's the chief.
That was great.
He oversees 7 officers who investigate bear attacks. It's Jim's job to decide when a bear needs to be killed if it becomes a danger to the public. He has investigated dozens of bear attacks.
Well, looks like we got a bear track here.
Jim is joined by Lana Cerniello. She's a bear biologist. She specializes in understanding bear behavior, even why they occasionally kill. So Jim and Lana head to the scene of the grizzly bear attack.
The age of this clear cut is really good for bears. It offers a lot of security and cover.
Yeah, we're getting close to the area now.
Hey, here's a little black bear track, and it looks pretty fresh. Oh, there's a moose track, too.
Well, if we got that fresh of tracks, we better make a little bit of noise when we go on ahead.
For sure.
Scare the bears away. Okay.
Hey, bear! Hey, bear! Coming through!
This is what Lana and Jim want to avoid. Grizzly bears can reach 600 kilograms and stand 3 meters tall. They survive on vegetation like berries, roots, and some meat. In September of 2000, Max Tiley and his wife were driving down this old side road. Max is hoping to hunt some moose, but they soon see grizzly bear tracks besides some moose tracks.
Me, I don't want to get out because I'm scared. So I tell him I should stay in the truck, I said.
I'm just going to have a look up.
Unwisely, Max dismisses his wife's concerns. He decides to walk up the road, following the moose tracks, naively walking in the footsteps of the grizzly. But where was the grizzly? Lana and Jim search for clues to how it could have been concealed, unseen by the victim.
This looks like the spot the bear might have been just before the attack.
Could be a bear bedding area. So the bear was probably up there by the willows, and depending on the wind direction, he might not have had the opportunity to smell the victim, and if he wasn't making any noise, he doesn't have the opportunity to hear him until he gets quite close. So it's likely that he just surprised that bear.
Grizzly bears rely on their noses more than any other sense. They can smell a dead animal from a kilometer away, so they're used to knowing what's around long before they can see it. The next riddle is finding out where the victim was standing just before the attack.
I believe the victim was looking over the lake, perhaps looking for moose or moose sign, had his back to the direction that the bear came from.
Just 50 meters from his wife, Max Tiley stops to urinate. He has no idea that a bear is so close.
I'm not sure if the victim urinating had anything to do with the motivation for this attack. Bear home ranges tend to overlap each other. They're not territorial, but they do defend a personal space around themselves. And so if he's urinating, he's distracted, it gets within its personal space, and that could be the motivation there.
Now Tiley's enemy is physics. A man weighing 100 kilograms cannot stop a 200-kilogram bear that can charge at 45 kilometers an hour. Mr. Tiley doesn't remember much of the attack, but his body does. His hands show scars from jaws puncturing his skin. The injuries suggest Mr. Tiley may have held up his arm to protect his face from the bear's jaws. They easily tore into his hands. Mr. Tiley's face also provides clues. His face contains scars from his forehead being pulled down over his eyes. Designed for digging roots and ripping apart logs, the bear's 10-centimeter claws also attacked his face.
So the victim was taken down here. The bear bit him several times in the head. The investigators said they found blood all through this site. His wife up at the truck heard the yelling and screaming. She grabbed the gun out of the truck and some bullets and tried to come and help him.
But as Mrs. Tiley runs to rescue her husband, she gets the shock of her life.
Oh my God, there's a grizzly bear just ran towards me. I never in my whole life that I get so scared. And when I get back to the truck, there was no bear. And then I started hollering for him. I said, "Honey, are you all right? Honey," I kept saying, but nothing, just silent.
But where's the bear? Has it left for good, or will it return to her husband?
In this circumstance, the best thing you can do is if the road is passable, you get into your vehicle and you just drive your vehicle right at that bear. You honk your horn, you do everything you can to try to get that bear off the victim.
But Mrs. Tiley decides she can't reach her husband in the truck. The lake has cut a gully in the road. Mrs. Tiley drives into town to get some of her family and to alert police. It takes 2 hours to return. It's a risky decision. Her husband may bleed to death or be attacked again.
This bear felt threatened and was acting in a defensive manner. This was not a bad bear. It went and it immobilized that threat. And once that threat was immobilized, that was the victim, then this bear left and did not come back. And this is shown by the fact that the victim was left there for 2 hours and the bear didn't come back and did not predate on him at any point.
Before dark, we got back over there. Oh my God, he was still alive yet. He tried to talk, but he can't because his face was just bloody, and this is his skull here. It was over his eye. And those boys tell me, "Grandma, don't look at him."
Mr. Tiley survives his attack but is never the same again. Tragically, this terrible attack could have been avoided.
So this victim had seen grizzly bear sign on the road as well as moose sign, but because he was moose hunting, he wasn't thinking at all about the grizzly bear. He wasn't making noise when he went into the area. He wasn't worried about the wind, and this is probably what got him in trouble.
As humans, we're encroaching more and more into their habitat, and it's up to us to learn some basic bear behavior to avoid encounters with bears, and particularly negative encounters with bears.
You're right, because in this case, a good bear got involved in a bad encounter.
Grizzly bears can run 50 kilometers an hour, so there's no way to outrun them. But what happens when a black bear is the attacker? That's the question that takes Jim and Lana to their next case in northern British Columbia. In August of 1997, this holiday spot was the location of the most horrific bear attack in recent memory. A black bear attacked 4 tourists, killing 2 in just a few minutes.
To me, there wasn't a decision to be made, but to go try to help the person that was screaming like that.
Lana and Jim have come to the scene of the attack. Before the incident here, Lana had studied bears in this park and the risk of a bear attack. The Liard Hot Springs is a provincial park near the northern border of British Columbia. There are 2 heated pools fed by hot springs. The warm water allows this northern park to become an oasis of plants, attracting wildlife, including hungry bears.
How many people would have been here the month of the attack?
Well, the attack happened in mid-August, which also is a time that I identified as the peak visitor use plus peak bear use, so both of them overlap.
Okay, this is where it happened.
Okay, let's get started.
Much of their information comes from the provincial coroner's report. It contains the basic facts of the case, but leaves many questions unanswered. The first riddle is why there was a bear so close to a busy boardwalk in August. Lana suspects there must have been food nearby.
I'm just gonna go check out the vegetation.
Okay, I'm gonna get a couple of photos.
Lana is searching for berry bushes, a staple of the black bear diet. Male black bears can weigh up to 250 kilograms, standing over 2 meters high. Bears can eat up to 20,000 calories a day as they get ready for winter hibernation. That's as much as 60 hamburgers for a human being. But Jim and Lana know that the black bear who attacked here was different. The bear had a problem. Winter was coming. To survive, the bear needed to put on weight for winter hibernation. And so far, it was 25 kilograms underweight. So on that August day, a hungry, desperate black bear found a berry bush of its own. But it wouldn't be alone for long. Over at the Alpha Pool, the McConnell family of Texas was enjoying a swim. After an hour, Patty McConnell invited her son to take a walk on the boardwalk, leaving her daughter behind. The mother and son arrived at the Hanging Gardens and stopped to look.
If I remember the report correctly, the mother and son were standing at the top of the Hanging Gardens, and then on their way back down, they saw the bear in this area here.
Unknown to the family, their arrival was noted by the bear, who probably smelled them first.
So, did the bear come up on the boardwalk, or did it come after them?
Yeah, made a woof noise down here, came up on the boardwalk.
When faced by a black bear, the best policy is to stay calm and never run. Unfortunately, the family did neither.
He yelled run to his mother, and they both started to run down that way.
That's never a good thing to do. That can really evoke that predatory response in an animal.
Most bears flee when they encounter a human, but sometimes bears attack in self-defense. The bear may charge at you and become agitated. Much rarer are predatory attacks when the bear treats humans as prey. Never run. And in a predatory attack, you should fight back.
So the bear rushed her from behind, knocked her down to the ground, and then it looked for a way to grab where it could kill her. And in my experience, that's what predators do. They catch their prey and get it so that it can't get away, and then they try and grab it somewhere where they can kill.
With his mother being attacked, the boy chose to stay and fight the bear. But can a boy defeat a black bear? A woman is being mauled by a black bear. Now her son decides to stay and fight.
He looked around the boardwalk and he found a stick somewhere out there. And he picked it up and he started to hit the bear with it.
Well, that's exactly the right response. You know, he had two choices. He could have gone back, or he could stay and fight. And what a brave little boy to stay and fight. So he was hitting the bear, and then he finally hit it in the snout, and it backed off?
Yeah, once he hit it in the snout, it backed off momentarily. Unfortunately, then it redirected its efforts at the boy.
220 pounds on a 13-year-old boy is a lot of weight. It's really difficult to fight back in that position.
Yeah, when the boy woke up, the bear was chewing on the back of his neck. He could hear it.
Bears will eat almost anything. Their back teeth are flat and ideal for grinding plants. But their front four canines, each 5 centimeters long, are designed for sinking into flesh and tearing it apart. Once they start an attack, it's hard to stop them.
So as I understand it then, the mother's on the ground over here and she's completely incapacitated. And the boy is on the ground over here. He's got the bear on top of him, so he's lost his ability to fight back, but he's screaming.
Yeah, and the yelling and screaming were heard down at the Alpha Pool where victim number 3 decided to run up and help.
Ray Kitchen was a local truck driver. He left his daughter back at the pool when he heard the screams.
So the 3rd victim came up the stairs here. He looked around, he found a stick. He started beating on the railings, yelling, rushing at the bear, trying to scare it away. He then speared the bear with the stick, where the bear let go of the boy and backed up. Then the bear came after victim 3 and he backed up. He was trying to get down the boardwalk. The bear took him down on the boardwalk. And then it dragged him off down onto the ground.
And the attack is not over. California residents Ingrid Bailey and Brad Westervelt are the next to be drawn into the attack. They are tourists on their way to Alaska.
Right when we got to the lower pool, we ran into a woman who was crying that they needed a gun and that help was needed. So at that point, Ingrid took off at a run and I followed after her.
Brad and Ingrid are joined by a 3rd rescuer. Ingrid hopes to use her medical training to help the victims.
The 3rd victim was no longer able to really actively defend himself against the bear. He was more sort of covering up at that point.
He was trying to get up, and every time he would stand, the bear would knock him back down. Ingrid was shouting and clapping her hands, and we threw what little pieces of rotted wood we could find at it. Something was needed, either a gun or an axe, rocks, even big rocks would have helped, but there was nothing available.
Okay.
Brad agrees to leave the scene to find a weapon.
I gave up on trying to help the 3rd victim when the bear picked the man up by the neck and shook his head a bit, and the man fell to the ground, missing a significant part of his neck. The bear then continued to eat the 3rd victim.
Ingrid tries to help the mother. Suddenly, the bear leaves in search of another victim.
I glanced up just in time to see the bear just, inches away from the woman's feet, and I scooped her up and pulled her a little bit farther up onto the boardwalk as the bear walked by. He then kind of took off into the woods and later attacked a 4th person.
I'm not sure why the bear left victim number 3. It could have been because there were so many people coming now, and I imagine the scene would have been complete chaos, or if it went to try to retrieve the earlier victims and sort of bring them all together.
The bear's rampage continued. A 4th victim was bitten on the thigh trying to run away. Finally, a tourist arrived with a rifle and killed the bear. The attack was over. Victim number 1, Patty McConnell, would die that afternoon. Her son would survive her, and victim 3, Ray Kitchen, would die on the scene. The 4th victim, Ari Vandervelden of Calgary, would survive the attack as well.
I think this was clearly a predatory attack on these people. I've just never seen a bear act like this where it just couldn't be chased off.
And there are no hard and fast rules in bear encounters, but in most cases that bear would have backed off and gone away. But all bears are not killers, just like all humans are not killers.
And the people did mostly the right things. They fought, they hit the bear, they threw things at the bear, they yelled at the bear, they did all the right things. It's just in this case it didn't work.
This type of attack is almost unheard of, and ironically, black bears are Canada's smallest. The largest are polar bears. They can weigh over 700 kilograms and dwarf any human. And now Jim is traveling north for a case where polar bears are the suspects. For his next case, Jim is traveling north to polar bear territory. Jim is heading for Churchill, Manitoba. Each year, hundreds of hungry polar bears migrate right past the town. They are waiting for the ice to freeze so they can spend the winter on the frozen Hudson's Bay hunting seal. So they walk past Churchill hungry, not having eaten for months. Jim arrives alone. Polar bears are quite different from other bears, so Lana has suggested he work with a different bear expert here. But Jim's first stop is to meet with the local conservation officer.
Jim Corbett, I presume?
Yeah, Richard.
Richard Romaniuk. Rick Hildebrand said you'd be coming to Churchill, so we're just getting ready for our Halloween patrol, so we might as well hop in the truck and get right at her.
Here in polar bear country, this celebration is a bit different than in the south. The problem is that the polar bears sometimes wander into town, especially at night. And to keep them out is everybody's business, from the smallest child to the police and conservation officers.
I guess it wouldn't be a good thing to be dressing up as a polar bear.
No, we discourage the kids from wearing anything white like a ghost or a polar bear.
Normally, kids aren't allowed on the streets after the evening curfew. But on this snowy Halloween night, the authorities make an exception. So the police and conservation officers keep searchlights on the lookout for any polar bears who might do some trick-or-treating of their own. As Churchill grew, polar bears became more tempted to enter town. Dealing with these giant carnivores has been a serious issue since the 1960s. Polar bears are the world's largest land predators. Standing over 3 meters tall, they are built to kill. For Jim's investigation, he needs the help of bear expert Chris Morgan. Here in 1977, a 14-year-old boy was walking to school after lunch, alone, during polar bear season.
Well, the boy was walking down the road here. He's looking in the pond over there, and then when he glanced off to his right, he saw a polar bear just over the hill here.
If he was walking down here and the wind was in his face, the bear wouldn't have caught his scent. So it could have been that the bear wasn't aware of his presence until he'd got right to this point.
Polar bears use their noses like we use our eyes. They can smell meat from 3 kilometers away and beneath a meter of ice. They rely on huge nasal cavities attuned to the smell of prey.
And often what they'll do, of course, just like grizzly bears and black bears, is try and get around downwind from what they're trying to identify. So that could well have been what he was exhibiting there.
I just happened to be walking, and I just out of the corner of my eye, or the right side of my eye, I looked again and stopped. And I froze. I've never experienced a feeling like this in my life. I had this flush feeling go right through my body. I believe people call it cold sweat. The whole posture of the bear, the standing in front, lifting its nose up, sniffing the air, bending his head down, bobbing up and down, and making that huffing noise. And, well, I just didn't know what the heck to do.
So the boy froze right here in the road. He didn't know whether to go home or go to school. Finally took off running as hard as he could go towards the school.
And I guess at this point the bear's senses are heightened. It's wondering what to do, and seeing a boy run in front of him at speed, the bear may have just triggered into a chase response.
All I can think of is feet don't fail me now, and I ran as fast as I possibly could.
So as the boy was running down the road, he heard a couple of cracker shells go off behind him. Apparently some RCMP had driven up, they'd seen what was going on, and they fired a couple of cracker shells towards the bear.
Unclear really as to whether the bear had entered this chase response mode and was chasing the kid down the street, or if the alien sound of these cracker shells, which would have made a bear very stressed at that point to hear them, if that had actually sent the bear running instead.
While I was running up the hill here, I was giving her as fast as I could, and right beside me, I kid you not, this bear ran right by me.
Well, you see some similarities between this bear, what it did, and what a black or grizzly might do. If they're surprised, they can act defensively, or it can turn into a predatory attack.
But of course, then with polar bears, they differ from grizzly bears and black bears a little bit because they're so highly carnivorous in nature. You know, 90% of their diet is meat, unlike grizzly bears and black bears. But of course, it's good for people around here to understand that it's never good to surprise a bear, never good to suddenly encounter a bear.
I can't agree more. And at this time of year in the fall, when there's so many bears around, this boy shouldn't have been walking along the road all by himself in a deserted area like this, where he might encounter a bear. Should have been riding in a vehicle, or at least walking in a big group.
Today, school children are safe from polar bears because everyone is on the lookout. Doors are kept unlocked in case someone needs to run inside to avoid a bear. Few people carry guns, but everyone calls police whenever they see a bear. And this morning, the phones have been busy.
Did you see anything when you were up there, Jack?
We saw tracking nothing. We went and tried to look at them trees up all the way to Cape Mary all over. We never seen nothing.
Most polar bears can be scared out of town with a few shots of a firecracker gun. But this bear has returned 5 times today. So it's time for more drastic measures. The bear is tranquilized with a dart rifle. The goal here is to keep bears and people safe and alive. Jim is invited to help identify the polar bear.
X17276 is the tattoo on both sides. They're in good condition. Part of the process for identifying the bear is if it's never been captured before, you give it 2 ear tags, okay? And the ear tags, we can switch the tattoo number, and you give it a corresponding tattoo on both sides of the mouth. That's what the green is. It's a biodegradable ink.
Once a bear is subdued, it still needs to be taken out of town. So offenders are either flown out 20 kilometers or taken here to a sort of polar bear jail. They wait here before being released when the ice freezes, and they'll happily start hunting seals.
It's very clear from a town like Churchill that the people here really understand bears, and so it speaks volumes about the need for education and the need for people just to understand a little bit about safety issues in bear country and the behavior of bears.
Yeah, my impression of polar bears before I came to Churchill was that they were an extremely dangerous predator that would always view a person as prey. And I think I've learned that while they're a predator, they don't always view us as prey, and that's evident by the very few attacks that we have in an area like this that has so many polar bears and so many people trying to view them.
And for me, it's pretty inspirational to see these people coexisting so well with polar bears in Churchill.
For their last case, Jim and Lana traveled to a town that hasn't solved its bear problem, where bears and humans are putting each other in danger every day. For the next case, Jim heads to the town of Whistler, British Columbia. Nestled in the mountains, this popular ski resort is growing quickly, right into bear territory. Here, the problem is breaking and entering. Bears have found that it is easier to steal human food and garbage than to find food in the bush. In 2001, there was a rash of home invasions by bears, 18 incidents in 1 month. It's a problem that has brought Jim and Lana to investigate. Is this a bear problem?
Hey Jim, how you doing?
Or a human one?
So I've taken a look around. Why don't you jump out and I'll show you what I think I found.
One of the houses invaded in 2001 was occupied by the Grills family.
I was playing, I go upstairs, and I made this thing, so I walked downstairs to show my dad.
I was working in the office, talking on the telephone, and I'd heard quite a bit of noise in the house, and it was only Ryan was home. So at one point I stopped the conversation, went and asked him what he's doing, and he said he's upstairs playing with Lego.
So the bear came through the screen door, broke in through there, went into the kitchen, started rummaging around in the cupboards and any food that was left on the counters.
And then I thought my mom was home, so I went into the kitchen.
So we came around the corner to have a look, and that's where he came eye to eye with the bear, and the blood-curdling scream. And
so I screamed as loud as I could and ran into the office and went under the desk.
So at the time of the encounter, were they cooking at all? Had they made any bacon or egg or anything smelly for breakfast that would have been vented out of the house?
No, they had dry cereal and there was some muffins sitting on the counter and some coffees and things like that, but nothing that would have smelled a lot.
Ryan's scream had not only scared me, but scared the bear. I started screaming, clapped my hands really loud, scared the bear further onto the patio, and then kept screaming and yelling and sent him off into the woods off the property.
Well, that kind of indicates to me that this bear had had an encounter before this one. It had known kitchens, associated houses with food, human food, and how to get it. And at this point was just sort of looking around and came upon a screen door, which was easy to break in.
Soon homes in 2 neighborhoods were reporting bear break-ins. But exactly what kinds of human food do black bears like so much? And how do they get in? No one filmed any of the bear break-ins in 2001, so we decided to find out what food bears like. We hired a trained bear and filmed what happened when it was turned loose on a well-stocked kitchen. Jim and Lana want to see what happens too, so they will be watching on a monitor.
I told you should never leave your window open in bear country.
Be pretty gentle in it. Broke the cup.
He's doing a good job. Well, the only wild bear I've ever seen do this. Ripped apart the place.
Bears are smart. They want to eat as many calories as they can without much effort.
Oh, there's Cheerios.
This bag of candy is why bears love human food. It takes just a few minutes to eat 2,000 calories, not counting the wrappers. Bears have no problems with handles, and they're strong enough to bend a car door open.
Pretty gently opened that too, isn't it?
Yeah, I've seen them open things, so even ones lids on garbage cans would be pretty, they're pretty agile.
In my experience, the bear's gone for a lot of sugar items. Right there, he's drinking a sugary juice. We use molasses quite often in our traps.
It's like the Martha Stewart of bears, hey? Cleans up after himself.
Bears are shrewd. Once they discover human food is filling and easy, they'll keep coming back for more. However, that night, Jim receives an emergency call. Local authorities are alerted to another bear that is breaking into backyards. As a senior conservation officer in the area, Jim is asked to help find the bear, and Lana comes along.
We walked right up to our car.
Oh.
Kind of just stepped in.
Is there garbage around here at all? Or?
Across the street, there's
a black bear has been spotted in a parking lot near some condos and a restaurant.
Want to let a couple of bangers go on the other side, and then see if he runs across here.
We've got a pyrotechnic gun. I'm just going to load it up in case we want to scare the bear with it. Shoots 2 different types of flare type things, a cracker and a screamer.
Jim and the officers are armed. Their goal is not to kill the bear, but to teach it to fear and avoid humans.
Still in
near my side here. It's closer to the gray vehicle. Copy.
10-4, can you see him from where you are?
No, he's deep in the bush. If somebody comes on this side and we load the bear banger from this side, we can scare him on it.
Bears usually find these firecracker guns terrifying. But so far, there's no sign of the bear. An hour later, another call brings Jim and Lana to the back of a hotel. This time, it is a different bear. The officers load their guns with rubber bullets, another way to convince bears that humans and their food should be avoided.
I don't know how we're going to get him out of there. Where is he?
We'll use this as a backdrop there.
To blue recycle.
Use that as a backdrop?
Trash
Yeah, we want him to go out that way.
Back off this. You can just are you ready?
As the terrified bear flees, it leaves a trail of urine. The officers move in to inspect what brought the bear here. To a bear, this is a free buffet.
None of this should even be in here. This is for papers. This stuff should all be locked up.
Who belongs to this?
This is one of the hotels here. Some of them share this area, but
I don't think much of it, and I think that this just causes problems. It just makes problem bears. It's upsetting, I would say, to say the least. It's very upsetting. It doesn't take a lot to get a bear-proof garbage can and to make sure that garbage can is always closed. And if you're going to have an establishment in an area with bears, then I think it's your responsibility to do that.
But how do you stop a bear with a taste for human food? When we come back, the surprising conclusion to the B&E bear case. Jim is upset by what he sees in Whistler. Bears are finding lots of human food here. Like bait, this food is inviting bears to get too close to human beings. And those encounters can be deadly to both humans and bears. It is a danger that Stephen Hill personally encountered during the wave of break-ins in 2001. Hill was a journalist who had written a series of articles about bear safety for a local newspaper.
So I'd just written a story, a front page story called Beware of B&E Bears. And I ended it with telling people what they should do to avoid having bears come into their house, keep their windows secure and their garbage and all that sort of stuff. And also what to do if you happen to encounter a bear.
So how did the bear get into the house in the first place?
Well, the window was open about ½ an inch. Even though this fellow had just written an article in the paper that people shouldn't do that, he hadn't taken his own advice.
And I started hearing dishes rattling and, you know, all like things dropping on the floor. So I got out of bed carefully and peered around a corner. There was a bear. There was sugar and coffee and like everything was pulled out of the fridge and the cupboards, and it was a disaster. So I banged on the window. The bear got frightened by this right away. But I had miscalculated because the windows were so close together that the bear ended up being 6 feet away from me when it left the house. So I did the same thing, lifted up my arms and said, "Go away, you know, get out of here." And the bear jumped forward and went, "Huh." It scared me, and I ran.
In this encounter, I think what happened is that the man and the bear ended up really close to each other. He said about 6 feet apart, and so the bear's reaction was, he was in his personal space. Get out of my personal space. Of course, then the man reacted by he just turned around and ran. And that's not the reaction you want to have. You want to maybe make yourself as big as possible, avoid direct eye contact, back off, making noise, but just trying not to run, because you really want to try not to evoke a predatory response.
I'd been writing stories saying, don't run, the bear will think you're prey. And I ran. And then when I realized I shouldn't be running, I turned around to face the bear again, and it was already wandering off.
So I think this bear had done this before. We're in the same area as a lot of those other break-ins occurred, close to where the other house was broken into. And the bear just seemed to know what it was doing. The window was only open 1/2 of an inch, and I managed to get it open, slit the screen, and climb in.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this behavior first happened, whether someone fed it from a house or whether it first, broke in, but bears are extremely smart, and once this type of thing happens, it's really, really difficult to deter.
The last I saw of it, however, 3 days later, on a Saturday, I was in my apartment, in my suite, doing a news story, typing a news story on my computer, and I heard a couple of sharp, like the backfiring of a car, but I know the sound of a shotgun. And I found out later that just down from my place, the bear had entered another house, and police or conservation service came and shot it.
Jim remembers the bear's death well. He was the conservation officer who approved the shooting. Carelessness by humans cost this bear its life, joining 1,000 others killed each year.
But I think what we really need to focus on in this instance is that it seems really funny. Though you got this bear that's doing all these break-in entries and breaking into all these homes, and it's in all the press coverages, but what this resulted in was the death of this animal. And I don't, find that funny at all. People need to remember that bears are wild animals, and in Whistler, you're living here in bear country, and they need to be respected.
The people in Whistler are very tolerant right now. There's a lot of bears that are coming right into the village, and they're still getting into things. And if there is ever an attack in Whistler or even near Whistler, those people's attitudes may change, and it may result in the death of a lot of bears, not just 1 or 2.
Whistler is not alone. In our love affair with the wild, we humans are moving our homes and our garbage into bear territory, into the home of animals who are stronger and faster than us. To live with them, we need to give them space and respect. That way, no one needs to get hurt.